You're listening to Legends Library. Now, here's your host, Lisa Mountain and Kyle Rollins.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Kyle.
And I'm Joe.
And you are tuned into Legends Library. We are a podcast dedicated to the Legends line of the Star Wars books and the expanded universe. And today we have an incredible, awesome episode, and we've been building up to this one for quite some time. So please, everyone, welcome Joe to the show. Yay!
I hear him.
Yeah, so all the listeners are well aware of who you are because we talk about you all the time. So it's really awesome to finally have you here and to see your cat at the same time.
Thank you, Lisa and Kyle. It's great to be here. It's overdue. Strider is joining us for how long I don't know. I'm glad to see you guys and to be here.
Great.
Pleasure having you, brother.
So the whole episode we're going to be talking about supernatural encounters because the final edition is coming out this Sunday. So hopefully we're going to get this episode timed out at the same time. So this will be a bit of a spoiler episode, guys, of course. But really to kick it off, we want to know how you got started in all this.
Okay, so we have to go back in time a bit to 2008. This is back when Star Wars, the official site, had a paid section called Hyperspace, which older fans will remember. And I had pitched to Pablo, who was running it, this is Pablo Hidalgo, to bring onto it an unpublished story called Cult Encounters that Rich Handley and I had written for Star Wars Gamer, now going back even further, which never got published. And additionally, there was going to be a third part called Supernatural Encounters, which was going to deal with the sort of the supernatural parts of the Star Wars universe. And both of these were going to sort of tie in the old Marvel series and sort of develop what Archie Goodwin and Roy Thomas sort of never got to develop, which they were heavily hinting at. So if you go back and read that run, you can see what they were dropping. So it basically was going to pick up from that and develop that. And Pablo gave the green light, and that's pretty much how it all sort of began. It was at that point. And it's developed ever since then. Hyperspace, unfortunately, was shut down before it was completed. So it went into limbo for a time. And then in 2014, I approached Dan and Matt at Lucasfilm to see if they were interested, and they expressed interest in publishing it on the Star Wars blog in increments, because they were like, wow, this is really long. And
how long is it for listeners?
It's over 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
At the time, it was admittedly shorter at the time, but I had said to them, it's not done. It needs work. It needs development. Are you guys on board with me doing that until you put it on the schedule? Which is the same thing I had said to Pablo years earlier, and they agreed. They were like, yeah, that's fine. But as we all know, Lucasfilm took a turn towards sort of away from what they now call Legends, and towards the new canon, and so it went into limbo again. But I set out to fulfill my end of the bargain, which is to complete it properly, and then because fans suggested that, oh, wouldn't it be great if it had illustrations? So, we raised money for illustrations. And we also added end notes. And it kind of exploded into this sort of larger thing where there's now Corey, who's one of my editors, is working on an atlas. Several have spoken about appendices. I mean, there are appendices actually, but I mean, spoken of rather like an index.
Okay.
Because it covers such a long span of time, like sort of eons.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot. It's dense. It's not light reading. It's
Yeah.
Matt Wilkins called it, which I appreciated. He called it the Silmarillion of
I
Star
was
Wars.
just honestly about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it reads. So it's a challenging and that's just the nature. I mean, that was the nature of it from its outset. It was intended to be structured in the way it was structured, which is not like a novel. You wouldn't write a novel this way. I mean, not if you want people to read it. You, it was written. It was conceived for Star Wars Gamer, and then for Star Wars Hyperspace, which catered to more of a niche sort of audience of hardcore Star Wars fans that had read a lot of the West End Games materials and the older EU, like going back to the late 70s and in through the 80s, knew the Ewoks cartoons and whether they loved them or not, had seen them. So that's where it was drawing from. It was drawing from a lot of the far off corners of the EU. And sort of bringing it, how does it tie into the mainstream, all these books that you see behind Kyle? How does it tie into this overall story? And that's where the sort of the legacy, that series right there next to Kyle, like that with Abeloth, that was the big sort of tie-in. So if you've read those books, and if you've read the Alan Moore Devil World stuff that Dark Horse reprinted, then you've got this sort of foundation for where this goes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Theoretically, anyway.
Pulled it off.
And how did you two meet? I don't actually remember this story.
Kyle, do you remember?
I do actually. Yes. It was at least a year before we sort of started working on it with you, I think. And it's what's a 3 or 4 years? Something like that. All the same. It was Quora. It was on Quora. And at that point in time, I was still a fan. I was better by then, but I was still one of those people who were just spiritually scarred from and it's because it's like, okay, yeah, they say like don't take things so seriously, but it's just like, hey, tanking the expanded universe really hurt my heart. Because there's some things that you just want to rely on, and I know business is business, but it just happened in such a way, and you're just like, wow, really? And that like just really stuck with me. So in other words, long story short, I was that fan who would just be like, I would see somebody say something positive, and it's just like, right. And Joe's just like, well, hang on a minute. It's just something random that I said on Quora. And it's just like, wait a second, I know, because I've been like looking at the timeline, Star Wars Timeline.net, since I was at least in middle school, checking that out. I'm like, so it's just like, wait a second, I know exactly who you are. And we started talking from then, and I stopped being so against the grain, so to speak. It's just like, listen, it's it just happened back then. Anyway, it's like it's just a couple years deep. It's just like all the movies were still coming. It's just like, we'll just see, just see what's going to happen.
That was really good. He you don't often see that on any social media or online forum where the person writes back and says, actually, you've made a a good point.
Mhm.
I hadn't thought of it that way, and that's how Kyle was, which I was really impressed by, because these things tend to devolve into fighting,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. That's
Does
the
it?
climate we're in. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ever since the internet, you've had that, but
Yeah.
it's gotten much worse. So I was impressed by that, just how reasonable he was and how nice he was. And
Oh.
at some point, Kyle, I don't know if you volunteered
Oh
or
yeah.
you did. You volunteer? Or I asked. It was one or yeah, because I needed someone to proofread and to edit, and he's like, me,
Yeah.
please bring me on board. And honestly, it was the best decision I made, because Kyle went above and beyond,
Mhm.
like what I expected, or anyone would expect. I mean, this thing, like I said, is 1,000 pages, and he just read it and reread it, and notes upon notes upon notes, all of which was like super beneficial, because I'm not a clean writer.
Okay.
I'm a fast, I have to get the ideas out, and move on before it's no longer there.
Mhm.
So I leave a lot of wreckage behind in the manuscript, all of which Kyle had to sort of like go through and be like, well, you know you could fix it this way and that way, and here's another option, which was amazing, because no, that's what every writer wants, is an
Mhm.
editor who says, here are your options, as opposed to, this is how it is supposed to be done or written. um Particularly like modern editors who haven't read, because I'm writing in a style that's a bit older, so going back to like the pulp era is sort of, that's where I'm drawing from, because that's what I read, that's what I love, and that's what comes out, like that's what
Okay.
naturally comes out. And so it's not how modern writers write. uh so Kyle had to deal with that, and tackle that, and it was a fun, we had a blast. I mean, just going back and forth with him. I'm like, oh, actually, this spelling of this word is yeah, he remembers it. It's archaic. It goes back to, and I would give an example, like, oh, if you read Clark Ashton Smith, he used this word in this context, and he's like, duly noted, like, so yeah, it was that's fun, when you have that. You don't get that often,
Mm.
in whether that's professional publishing or independent publishing. You really often don't see that, unless they have a sense of what you're doing. But like, even J.R.R. Tolkien, when he was writing the Silmarillion, handed his editor a copy of, I forget which book it was, but it was from Lord Dunsany, and he said, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going for. So um it's a challenge on the part of both. And as a writer, and this is sort of advice for all those writers out there,
Mhm.
don't be too precious about your work. You can't, like, listen to your editor. You don't, it's your proofreader. You don't always have to like follow them, but don't be so precious about what you're writing, as if it's like so wonderful and grand. I mean,
Yeah.
like, 9 times out of 10, they're pointing out something for a reason. So because I run a small press publishing company as well, so I've seen that, more, not, thankfully, not terribly often, but I have seen writers who just really are very resistant to any kind of advice.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm a little guilty of that myself, which is why I have 5 unpublished books that are just kicking around. So, but I think it's also because like you're your own worst critic, so like it's never quite good enough. So like when someone else comes in and goes, "Oh, this isn't good," you're like, "I know," like, but I don't want to like change it because I haven't figured it out myself. So like that becomes a
And that's
problem.
fine.
Yeah.
That's 100% fine. That's what takes so long, is figuring it out yourself. And this can be lore related, or this can be prose related, in terms of like, how do I want to construct or work how this paragraph reads, or story wise, how do I want to develop this? Do I want to develop this? Should this be developed? Should this be cut? These are all the things that a writer wrestles with. And an editor can sometimes act as if they have the solution, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So you take that time that you need to go in your direction, because ultimately it is your work, so you have to make it ring true. When you're writing in a shared universe, that adds an additional layer of complexity, because it now also has to fit it. If you're a writer that cares about these things, which I am, and I think anyone who's writing in the expanded universe or any shared universe should care about this, which is, does it fit? How does it fit? And if you're going to bend the lore, make sure that that works. Like, make sure that you're bending it in such a way that the reader says, "Oh, okay, that's a twist I didn't know about, but it works." Because story is malleable. It's not even real history. In some regards, there are things we discover that we think were true, but then we learn a wrinkle about a certain figure in history or a certain event in history. It happens all the time. So you don't want to be rigid either when it comes to lore. You can definitely add things and add these wrinkles in, but the reader has to be able to comprehend that. And because if it's a contradiction and there's no good reason for it, well, then you've not done your job. And you can't, oftentimes a writer will leave it to the editor to work that out. And to some degree, an editor will say,
Kyle's
all right,
laughing.
I'll take that on.
Yeah.
But you really shouldn't, because the editor may or may not know, the history as well as he or she should. Because oftentimes, like, you're working for a publication and they've got lots of different stories. It's not just Star Wars, or whatever the property is. It's lots of things. They don't always know, something that came out in 1980. So it behooves each writer to do their research and to listen to others when they offer and say, hey, actually, you forgot about this. Which is why having Kyle and Patrick and Corey and Harry and Robert and Ed and Ryan, I think I got everybody, there to oversee this thing and point out, potential discrepancies, or even just to have feedback to bounce off of, that's a resource that is a gift. And when you're given a gift, you appreciate it. You don't rail against it. So I was really lucky in that regard and blessed to have all of these, these guys on board. Did I mention everybody? Kyle, if I leave somebody out, sure. Even before these guys came on board, there was Luke, and Matt, and I'm sure I'm forgetting. I am. Sorry, it'll come to me during the course of this. But yeah, there was another group of guys, who helped out. So it's been a blessing. Apologies when
That's awesome. How did you actually get started with Star Wars as well?
As a writer or as a fan?
Well, both actually. Start with being a fan first.
Well, that goes back. That goes back to the release of A New Hope in theaters.
Of course,
that was my friend across the street, Joe Lodespoto, who popped over. We had just moved in where we are now, which is on Long Island, New York, the year prior. So we were little kids, and he came over and he's running his mouth about Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader and the Force and lightsabers. I had no idea. This was 1977. I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah,
You got to see this movie. So that was it. And I have to credit my dad, because after seeing it and completely becoming obsessed, like it took over.
yeah.
And I was prepped for it, because I had been a huge Lost in Space fan.
Okay.
I used to come home from school, and they did back to back. It was Lost in Space and Land of the Lost, and nothing. My mom will tell that story, like nothing could come in the way of that. She'd have a snack ready for me, and they tried, like teachers tried, and other students would try. Like, no, gotta be home. Lost in Space and Land of the Lost are coming on. So I was like ready. I was like I was geared up. So when Star Wars came out, having the sort of the special effects that it did to make it so believable, and I was already on board, ready to go. That was it. I lost my mind.
Yeah.
So my dad brought home the Marvel comics, and I'm like, wait, the story continues. Like, it was Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, the droids, like. That was it. Like, so the EU was already like part of my zeitgeist. I'm like, yeah, this is where it continues. Splinter of the Mind's Eye came out. I grabbed it. That was Alexander's department store, which no longer exists. But my mom, that was her favorite place to go. And on the third floor, they had toys, games, books, and records. And I remember seeing that when that came out, and I was like, there's a novel, and it continues the story. Like.
Yeah.
And I remember in my head, like trying to reconcile like the Marvel comics with Splinter, as far back as like 78. That's when that book came out. Like,
yeah.
trying to how do they all fit together? It took over like everything. Like my imagination was like there with that. So that's how Star Wars started. And Return of the Jedi came out, and I lost interest. I was older, and I was getting into other things. And it was geared a bit too young for me, at an age where I was kind of, feeling like a teenager and getting into music, and horror was more of where my headspace was at. Horror and like, serious, like high fantasy. I was reading Tolkien, and so, Return of the Jedi just wasn't doing it for me. And so I kind of lost touch with Star Wars for a bit, until Dark Empire and Heir to the Empire came out. And that was this sort of that magical moment where I was walking into a comic book shop looking for work, because I didn't end up working there, but I ended up working at a bookstore shortly afterwards. It was either B. Dalton or Walden Books, or one of those. But I remember in that comic book shop, on the wall, I think it was issue 3 of Dark Empire, where it was Luke hovering in black, and his eyes were rolled back, and Leia was kind of like, in the foreground, like not cowering, but like, afraid. And I was like, what's that? What happened to Luke?
Yeah.
He turned to the dark side. What? And the comic book shop owner was like, yeah. He goes, it's all in this series. So that was it. And then, of course, then the Tim Zahn books were out too. I'm like, wait, new books are out? And then I rewatched the original trilogy, and I fell in love like all over again, like just as intensely as if it was, 79, 80, like those years. And because I worked at a bookstore, I had access. I had to contact Dark Horse and West End Games to get refills on books, because I wanted to promote them. It was cool, actually. So I got to speak to people like Bob Cooper and Bill Smith. And at that point, I was furiously doing the timeline, to make it all fit, because there really was no official timeline. So I was like, guys, I have this timeline. So they were like, yeah, send it along. So that was sort of the start of the whole thing. And then with Bill Smith, he invited me to write an RPG adventure, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I did it. It was for the Game Master screen, and it didn't get published in that, although I did get a thank you. And I got a ton of books, which was nice. And Dark Horse too sent me a ton of like free comics.
Oh wow!
Which,
Do you still have them?
I do.
Oh,
I
awesome.
definitely. Yeah, I kept all of that. So those guys were great. Like it was a different era. Like Star Wars wasn't corporate then.
Hmm.
And the creators, the authors, and the editors were just, they were more engaged with fans in a more real way. And so when I said yeah, I want to be a writer and all of that, like they were encouraging. Bill Smith was would spend a long time talking to me about like what was going on like behind the scenes, which was kind of a nice sort of insight into the Lucasfilm
That's cool.
sort of like machine.
Anything you could
Bob,
share?
this was at a time when Lucy Wilson was the head of licensing, and she was there with, I think Sue was there.
Okay.
There's a third guy who is no longer there. And that's a funny story too, if I could ever remember his name. But what Bill had said was like the three of them were like sharks in a tank. Like they didn't necessarily get along with each other, but they had to work together.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting and insightful. But my concern back then was the Marvel series. When are we going to reprint this? When are we going to reference these things? Because I was still very much obsessed with the work of Archie Goodwin and what he had done to continue Star Wars. Because you have to remember, like Lucas himself and Bill Lippincott sat down with Roy Thomas to discuss where the future of Star Wars would go until The Empire Strikes Back. And then when Roy stepped down, it was Archie Goodwin who took over, and he basically got those instructions. So they had firsthand, they sat with the maker himself, and if not plotted out, at least discussed where they were going to go and how it should go. And while Lucas didn't care so much for Ray Thomas's sort of Ray Thomas is from the Moody Blues. Roy Thomas's direction, I do that all the time. With Jackson, like he thought maybe, which is ironic, like Jackson, and of course then he brought Jar Jar on, years later. It's like Jackson wasn't even as funny as Jar Jar was. But it was a different George Lucas before he had kids. But in any case, so that's the reason that Thomas stepped down and Archie Goodwin took over. And Archie Goodwin really had a background in the pulps, and he even grew up in like a similar town and situation to Lucas himself.
Okay.
But he was really well read, and he really understood what space opera was. And man, those stories were to me, there's still they feel so much like the first film, the first two films. Like they have that spirit of where Lucas was kind of bringing Star Wars, because Star Wars came it didn't spring out of the ground, out of thin air. It comes from a tradition of space opera going back to the early 1900s, going back to Burroughs and Lee Brackett and Edmund Hamilton and Jack Williamson, and Amazing Stories and Weird Tales. Like that's where Star Wars, its DNA is all right there. And Goodwin understood that. A lot of the early authors did. The guy who wrote the newspaper strips before Goodwin and Williamson took over, he understood that. A lot of the early authors did. Today's authors maybe don't have that, because we're going back to a period that people don't read as much anymore, which is the nature of things. But they did, and I felt like it was a neglectful on the part of, the early stuff to not reference it. And then finally you started to see it happen. Like they started to bring these older stories into the fold, which was amazing. But I think I've really run past your question into whole other sphere. So apologies, because I can run on. But yeah, it was,
That's
Do you
fine.
need new shoes? Keep running. Teasing you,
that was like, you asked like where my how I got into it, and that was pretty much, that was my focus, was that. And so when I got the offer to do Star Wars Gamer with Rich Handley, it was that first issue, which was called Marvelous Aliens. I don't think we had the cover on that one. I think it was Boba Fett was on the cover, but that was like the biggest article in the issue, was and it was really about the aliens from the Marvel series. And so the next piece was going to be cult encounters, and then the third would have been supernatural. So that was always my target, was these old stories that I felt were kind of neglected, or just people didn't know about them because they weren't in print, until Dark Horse finally brought them in print. And so yeah, it was seeing that through, which I'm grateful did come to pass finally.
Yeah.
The day is at hand.
And here we are now.
Yeah.
We are. Yeah.
So,
I really appreciate the insight they've given everyone here. It's amazing. See, you got me too. You were like, that's before Lucas had kids, and I was like, your insight is just.
Well, Lucas changed. He did. He changed when and you can see that, even with Return of the Jedi, and his, his view towards violence in cinema changed. And he had a certain perspective.
There's just a lot of cats in our videos, always.
I understand his perspective. I appreciate it. He may have swung the pendulum a bit too far in one direction.
He agrees.
Yeah, I apologize. My cats are always up and down, wanting cuddles, still around, in front of the camera, knocking stuff over. It's just what cats do, and
knocking the doors.
We are slaves to them, and we're fine with that. So
yes.
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm back.
So
they pretty much own everything from the doorknobs down.
I would love to start getting into the story. So if you guys could kind of kick that off as well.
Into the story.
Yeah.
People ask that question a lot, Jeff. Do you want to kick it off there, sir?
Sure.
I can.
It's basically anyone who might have read the West End Games material might recall the historian Arhul Hextrafon, and he was put in the early RPG stuff as a way to have an unreliable narrator. I mean, a reliable narrator, but one that if things changed, he could say, "Oh, well, we got the facts wrong about a certain thing." And Voron Nal was this sort of second historian that they used. Voron Nal got very developed lore-wise, but Arhul kind of didn't. So I wanted to take him and have him be the main protagonist here, and have him have composed a work that was so off the beaten track and so alien to what the mainstream conservative scientists and historians believed about the origin of the universe, that they were kind of up in arms a bit about this thing. And he's not there to even defend the work itself, because as it's not, I mean, it's not really a spoiler because it happens right at the very beginning. He's dead. Like
Yeah.
he hasn't survived this thing.
Yes.
So it's the work itself that has to do it, and those who've read it and see it and see that what he said has the ring of truth to it, versus those who don't, or who think this is ridiculous. And the reason that had to be done that way was because you had two different kind of strains of thought going on in the EU. You had sort of the Bantam and sort of Del Rey books, which, and even the West End game stuff, which had a certain concept of what ancient history was or might have been. And then you had the comics, particularly the more obscure ones, and specifically Alan Moore's work. So, and it really was, if you've read Devil Worlds, if you haven't, you should, because it's Alan Moore and it's brilliant. Alan Moore can do in 3-4 pages what authors struggle to do in 200. I mean, he's just that brilliant of a mind in terms of that. And I had loved Alan Moore since his Swamp Thing days. And I know, like, he's become a bit of a controversial figure, and that's stuff that sort of came out later, and that's fine. We don't have to go into that. No artist is perfect, or lives a perfect life, and we shouldn't expect that. But in any case, he was a brilliant writer, and I just loved those stories, and they told a picture of the ancient universe that was a bit at odds with, Bantam and those other stories. So I needed a way to sort of reconcile the two perspectives. And it's more fun to sort of pit them against each other, and have that, because it reflects real life, debates on subjects of the origin of life and the origin of anything, going back in time. And I my brain has always sort of had an interest in that. So wouldn't it be fun to put that in an EU context? And that was the sort of springboard for this story. So you have that frame story, which is the trial, that where this manuscript is being read and debated. And you have Hextrafon's story with his droid Q9, where what their journey, to sort of discover this, and that takes them into other space, which, again, if you've read the West End game stuff, you'll know that other space is this other hidden dimension behind real space. And it always puzzled me, like, so there are 2 RPG modules on other space, and it was never really developed much beyond that. The Cathol Outback, which Tim Zahn had a hand in, delved a bit into that, but not much. So like the mainstream EU books never really got into, and I thought, wow, here's this whole bizarre, wild dimension just sitting there, and no one's tackled it. And it kind of shows you like how much creativity and wild ideas were just running around in the EU at the time, that like, like authors, there was so much you could reach in any direction, and you'd pull something creative that you could develop. And other space was sort of like that went into sort of my territory, because again, I have an interest in the pulps and in weird tales and those that Lovecraftian sort of model that existed for weird fiction back then. So this was a great springboard to develop. So there's that story. That's Arhul's story, and then you have now a third story, which is what he discovers, which is the ancient history of the galaxy. And part of that is what he learns on his journey, and part of that, and this is the part that becomes suspect, is this vision that he's given that goes into details that he couldn't possibly know, that no one could possibly know, because it involves dialogue between ancient beings, and some malevolent, some benevolent, the celestials, the architects, the old ones, all of which have been referenced in the EU, none of which was ever developed.
Yeah.
So and this tied into what Archie Goodwin and Roy Thomas and other of those early writers were really sort of tapping into. It was that same sort of zeitgeist. Or let me give you an example. So in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, you've got a statue of Pomogena who's described exactly like Cthulhu. So it's all right there. And then when I'm forgetting the illustrator's name, when they adapted that series, the illustrator drew Cthulhu. Tom Palmer? Was it Tom Palmer? It might have been.
Just lost Kyle.
Oh, all right. Well, he'll be back.
He'll be back.
So he draws Cthulhu, so he picks up what Alan Dean Foster was doing.
Yeah.
And so you're starting to see the development of this, where these authors are connecting Star Wars to, if not directly to the Cthulhu mythos, then certainly to the weird fiction of the pulp sort of era.
Okay.
Of what Tales was doing. And so, and they're not alone. There are others who were doing, kind of tapping into this as well. So it was just a matter of making it more explicit, developing this to the point where, fans can run with this in any way they want to. And maybe fans who don't like that as much can, put that in its own category. It doesn't necessarily, the thing with crossovers, when they're done right, is they fit together well. When they're not done right, which is usually for crass commercial purposes, they stand out as not working. And we've all read crossover stories that just don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of wanted to go back to an older model of crossovers that were done with love, and were done with, like, what I mean is like love for the material, and done in a way that made sense, some kind of sense in any case. But I always left it in a way that the reader could say, well, it's not exactly that. It's something akin to that. So, if you absolutely hate crossovers, all right, well, it's not the alien, from it's it's a creature similar,
Yes.
or
much like humans in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we're humans, but we're not the same until.
Oh, right, exactly. Like, that's another thing. Like, yeah, like Earth was another tricky area, because there's a lot of people who don't want it to be our Earth, But Lucas says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So, so our Earth is there in another galaxy. Okay. So then that led to the question of, all right, so how do we have humans? Like, all right, so when you read Stackpole's books, this used to bother me, and it doesn't anymore because I worked it out. But when you read Stackel's books, his humans and his aliens behave very much like Americans circa the 1990s. Culturally, they just do. Like, they speak and they act, and the things that they do, like, it's all culturally very akin to us in that, you know, being in the United States in the 1990s. And I had trouble wrapping my head around that. But even in the films, like Han Solo, you know, I'll see you in hell.
Yeah.
That's a very earthy you know, thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in the EU. The EU is filled with stuff like that. And again, you could even find it in the films. You can find support for that.
Hot chocolate.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right there. You know, at the start of the EU or the modern EU, you've got hot chocolate. So I wanted to make sense of that because I thought you can make sense of it. I won't say how. And I won't even, you know, say if you know, a reader will find it successful or not. That's up to an individual, you know, person to say, yeah, that works for me. But it had to work for me, and you know, being the, you know, my own harshest critic, it was the kind of thing that I would spend, you know, a long time poring over. Does this make sense? Does this work? And what does it mean? What are the consequences of this, you know, moving forward? How does this affect? And there's because Star Wars, the EU has a lot of these sort of crossover potentials, we'll call them. How, and you could ignore them and say, oh, that's just an in-joke. But like, what fun is that? You know, it's more interesting. Like so Lucas himself sets the pattern for that. E.T. That is unequivocally E.T. in the Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
a bunch of E.T.s.
Yeah,
You could argue, oh, that's just him and Spielberg having fun. But I mean, in the film E.T. itself, you know, he looks back at the kid in the costume of Yoda and says, home, home. He recognizes Yoda as a character, as a person, as a race. And there they are in the pods. They are there. They're actually there. So as much as people want to argue that's an in-joke, then how do you explain their presence there? Like, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do, great. You know, like every person has their own headcanon, and I'm all for respecting that. By the same token, there are plenty of fans, myself included, who want to say, yeah, these exist in the same universe. So my question then was how do these all fit? How does it make sense? Now, the Star Wars universe is old, and it's gigantic.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at the figures that West End Games put to how many planets there are and how many races they are, I mean, these are astronomical numbers. I mean, this is the largest, you know, galaxy in you know, in fiction. It's just tremendous.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, it's one galaxy and there's 7 others, you know, smaller ones, but still galaxies are gigantic places.
Yeah.
Planets are gigantic places. We forget that sometimes.
Yeah. We get a little in on ourselves.
Sector.
Yeah.
Forget
that.
We just do.
Just a couple sectors over here, and it's just like, that is a lot of space.
Yeah. Yeah, like it took them 2 weeks to get to Bespin, you know, like.
Right, exactly. I mean, sure, hyperdrive, you know, hyperspace has made everything sort of, you know, seem smaller, but I mean, these are gigantic spaces. So there's plenty of room for things to have happened in the ancient past, and for stories to have occurred, and for, you know, empires to have risen and fallen during that period. So there's a lot that could fit. And so it's a matter of, well, then weaving that all in, and weaving it in such a way that it makes sense. it makes sense to the reader, and it makes sense from a sociological perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
What are
so
some of the crossovers you've included?
uh,
Because I know there's like there's a pre-reading list to read Supernatural Encounters. Like,
in that reading list, I left out the crossovers
okay,
because again, I want to give readers the freedom to say, this doesn't, I don't want this. I don't want this in my Star Wars. Fine. So they have that freedom to do that. Absolutely. But for those who do, there's another reading list. And I did include that in the end notes. There's something called the what is it called? I call the GUC, the Grand Unification, chart.
The Grand Unification chart.
And with that is the Grand Unification theory.
Yes.
Which is all the things that were brought in, that the EU and the EU writers previously brought in. Okay. Yep. And some brought a lot. Names are escaping me at the moment, but one author in particular brought in a lot of the stuff he had previously worked on. So like you'll see Black Star, the old animated series from the 1980s.
Okay.
Which I happen to love. It's space opera. I mean, it's early space opera, and it's awesome. But there was a lot of those kinds of things. So a lot are like blink and you'll miss them, and a lot are a bit more obvious. So anything that Lee Brackett wrote, because Lee Brackett is one of the architects of Star Wars, and
absolutely, Empire Strikes Back, yes,
and I believe more. That's a conversation for another time.
Yes.
I want there's a video on YouTube that I would love more people to see, called "Did Lee Brackett Write Star Wars?" And it's Lee Brackett and her husband Edmund Hamilton, who's one of the architects of space opera. I mean, he's one of the first ones writing space opera in like 1926, 27, and on till he died. And once they married, he and Lee would kind of help each other on stories. So they both had a role to play. But Lee Brackett, who began her career in the 1940s writing space opera in a way that betrayed what a lot of the critics were saying at that time about space opera, that it was derivative and cheap and hacky. She's writing literature. She's writing great literature that also happens to be space opera. She's not alone. C.L. Moore, who's one of her mentors, C.L. Moore and her husband, Henry Kuttner, basically took Brackett in and helped her to become a writer. And they remained friends the rest of their lives. So you have this, you had this kind of literary thing happening at this time where these writers are kind of helping each other out and befriending each other. Ray Bradbury enters the picture here because Lee Brackett mentored him. So here's this lineage of writers who are writing this time are writing against the grain. And Lee then went on to do Hollywood screenplays and became one of the big names in Hollywood at the time, which is how she got involved with George Lucas. And this video shows how it was actually much earlier than Empire Strikes Back. This was like during A New Hope, 70, 75, and provides the evidence that she was much more of an architect in constructing Star Wars than we are led to believe.
Hell yeah.
And so watch the video, make up your own mind. We can have a conversation about that at another time. But the point is, because I believe that she is such an architect in this thing, her and Hamilton, and I brought in her works. But Brackett was also unofficially writing in a shared universe. She was writing in the universe of Edgar Rice Burroughs, his Mars and Venus and basically the solar system stories.
Yeah.
She's unofficially writing more Mars stories. And she wasn't alone in this. There's a whole list of people that were doing this, including CL Moore, including Clark Ashton Smith, Lynn Carter, Michael Moorcock. It's a long list of people that were unofficially writing, stories basically set in this universe. They couldn't legally use certain races and characters, but you could see that they were skirting along the edges. And I have a link to that in the end notes for people who want to kind of dive deeper into that.
There are so many end notes.
Hence the
As
Silmarillion
you said before,
style.
Joe, you said it before. It's just like, y'all wanted them, you got them.
They're the bane of my existence, those end notes.
Yes, you spent a few weeks in particular just
a long time, and they're not even as comprehensive as they could have been. But like I said, you always want to leave room for others to sort of develop more. And with a lot of the crossovers too, as many as I referenced in the end notes, there are others I didn't reference because I think it's fun for people to discover things, on their own, and to have that moment of like, wait a minute, is he referencing this?
He is.
Yeah, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. It's just a fun game. Like once you get involved in it, and it's such a rabbit hole, and the Warren goes for miles and miles.
Yeah.
But it is a fun game. And that's, again, I didn't originate it. I just ran with what was already there in the EU. And again, if you don't like it, great. You can completely ignore it completely. But if you love it, like some of us do, it just opens up the galaxy to more. So, like in your RPG games that you're playing, and in your art, and in your fan fiction, whatever it is you do, whatever you're LARPing, whatever, however you express your fandom, the idea is always to expand the universe more. And as a writer, that's, I think, also partly your job. You don't want to just fill in the blanks. You want to add more mystery. You want to add more space for people to play with, because it's a living universe. And while Disney might have declared the EU over, that's their prerogative to do. Okay. But as fans, we don't have to, as fans, and as as a writer, like, our job is to keep it alive. Like, we don't have to like say, oh, okay, it's done, because it's not done. I mean, it's done as far as you want it to be done. Like, if you feel it's over, I've had enough, great, that's you. But if you want more, Supernatural Encounters was a way to really kind of blow that up. Okay, you want more, here's more in this direction, that direction, this direction, going forwards, going backwards. So when you ask me, Lisa, about specific crossovers I brought in, I want fans to sort of like enjoy that on their own. Yeah, when they come across it, and me not necessarily, although there are certain things that are explicit. Like, we have a Xenomorph already in the EU.
Yes, we do.
So that's not a spoiler. That's already there. If there's a Xenomorph in the EU, that means there's also a Predator. That means there's also the Engineers. So my job is then just, how does it make sense? How does that fit? So again, but we're dealing with the ancient past. So there is room for that. I believe there's room for that. And there's other things too. So I'll let you guys kind of discover. Kyle knows already. He's all the secrets that are there, but I'll let you guys find that
I've been trapped the entire time. Like nothing.
It's a little frustrating because I'm always like, could you? And you go, no. I'm like,
It
but it's
is.
me. Who am I gonna tell? Just tell me. Like, ugh. Not like I'm gonna record it and put it on YouTube or anything.
Well, you guys will have all the answers this Sunday.
You heard it. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
I'll
Sorry,
release,
had to.
I'll release it on the Discord and probably on my website as well. The Facebook page is still down.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Ask me why. Yeah, that's a weird thing that happens. That was taken down in February. I suspect that a troll was involved. Chris Nelson had a similar problem with his YouTube channel, and that's all it takes is a troll reports something,
Yeah.
and then the bots don't look into it; they just shut it down.
Yeah.
You rebut that, but it's in review.
Yeah.
And it's been in review for months, and it's like I never violated any community standards, not even close.
Yeah.
So there's no reason that it should be down. But it is like these things happen in life, and you just kind of have to work around them or get over them and move on. Rather than letting it ruin your day.
And fortunately, the pause on a Facebook page is not even nearly close enough to stop the buzz about your work.
I'm glad. I'm grateful to hear it. I'm grateful to the fans, the contributors, and really anyone who's expressed interest over the years, and it has been years. Yes. And everyone's patience, during the process, because it is a process. Lisa, you understand. Kyle, you understand. You can't rush this kind of thing. And I worked on it full time, every day, every single day, for years, because it is such an expansive work, and because you have to have connectivity that makes sense. It has to make sense with the larger EU. It has to make sense internally with what you're doing, which is not to negate the idea of mystery. I'm talking specifically about internal consistency, coherence, and then things like dialogue, and characterization. Like those are other aspects that are very important and take time, because you don't always know a character out of the gate.
Yep.
That character has to come to life on his or her own. Oftentimes, I feel they have to speak to me rather than me speak to them, because sometimes you try to control. This gets into very obscure territory, but let's just go there.
Yeah.
Sometimes you will try to dictate what a character says and does, and the character will resist. And it sounds super weird if you've never written a story before, but they speak their own language and their own actions oftentimes, and I'll find things shifting in ways that I had not planned or anticipated, and now I have to account for that, because often they're right.
That's Kyle weird. Again.
Oh, okay. So when for example, I've told this anecdote before, but when I first wrote the rough draft, the initial rough draft poured out of me in a non-stop 2-day period.
Wow.
It was like I stopped, to go to the bathroom and to have a snack, which I had while I was writing. Like I had done the research for a few weeks prior, and then when it was time to sit down and write, it just all poured out. The basic structure, and it's all still there. The vignettes and like the dialogue and all that stuff, that came later. That came, but the basic structure of the piece, it all just came out. That's It's a blessing when that happens, because that does not always happen. But so it was like the story was telling itself, and I was just the instrument through which it was doing so. It's a weird feeling, and it's a wonderful feeling when that happens. And I just had to kind of get it out as quickly as I could.
Yeah.
It's it just never happens. It rarely ever happens like that. And I've tried to do that. Oftentimes, you kind of have to plot it out, and there's a lot involved. And that's fine. That's great. But that was almost a miraculous event to have had that happen. So it was just building on that spine is what I've been doing since then. And again, allowing characters and stories to sort of tell themselves. Again, within the strictures of what the EU has already established, and working with that and having a dialogue with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's fun, is having a dialogue with the history, with these races, and then taking them, extrapolating, and then going backwards in time, to where were they back then, and that's sometimes surprising. Yeah, yeah, I hear Kyle laughing back there.
Oh,
So
yes.
I know
Yes.
he's thinking of something. Anything that you could think of that you want to talk about, Kyle, by all means. I can keep very, very vague and obscure.
Yeah, I want you guys to in depth.
I love it when you just go, because it's just like I'm right here on every word, man. But I was thinking, because you said that, yes, you work every day, and it's just like, I can personally attest that is very true.
I know
as far
you
as yeah. Well, thank you. But for you would write. It would be 3 o'clock, because that's the beauty of email and Discords and all that fun stuff. And Joe's just like 3 o'clock in the morning, be like, hey, you actually did live with these characters every day, and yeah, watching them grow, sir, has been a privilege on my end.
Well, thank you. The privilege was working with you and all of you guys. That was a real privilege, because that kept it, as most writers work in a vacuum. They're only within their own thoughts. And I did do that in the early periods of this. But then once you guys were on board, it was like having feedback, a place to bounce ideas. And does this work? Why not? And what was great is that, you guys had the freedom to be honest, and and just, and go back and forth. And sometimes there were different ideas on things.
Yeah.
The Sith was the biggest, I don't want to call it a headache. It was a challenge. We'll call it a challenge, because the EU left us in a state of bafflement. It was a bit confounding how the EU left off with the ancient Sith.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have a lot of different ideas as to how it all works out. And you can go to the KOTOR period, you can go to earlier, the Exiles, but there wasn't a lot of development, and that leaves room for fans to sort of run with things.
Right.
Now I had never played the game. I had never played Tor or KOTOR 1 or 2, so I was very much dependent on these guys to talk to me about that. And of course, I researched it, and I watched gameplays on YouTube, and I read as much as I could about it. But there's nothing like having firsthand accounts. But it's interesting, the takeaways that different people would have on certain characters. And I'm glad. I'm actually really glad for that. As challenging as that can be, I'm grateful too, because then you have a more rounded approach to well, how did the exiles actually, you know, how did they get to Korriban? Let's just give you an
Yeah.
example. Let's go into how did they get to Korriban? If they're prisoners, okay,
Mm-hmm.
why do they have lightsabers?
Right.
How is it that they have lightsabers when they arrive on Korriban? That doesn't make sense because the Republic would not have, and the Jedi would not have allowed them to have lightsabers on this ship. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Smuggled in.
Yes.
How?
Well,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, how does it happen in real prisons?
No.
Right. Yeah. See, so Lisa's on the same page that we were on.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. That's so you
That's
see where we went.
That's
That's it right there. But how, again, now, so how?
Now
we
I'm
have to go
thinking about
deeper.
that, and that's imagery that I
Exactly.
not planned on putting in my head today.
See what I mean? Like there's a lot of questions like that.
Yep.
That I don't want to say that the original EU writers didn't necessarily think them through, but maybe they never had a chance to explore those questions as well as they might have. Let's just put a positive spin on that, right? But that left it because now I'm writing about them, and I don't have the luxury to just ignore that question. I have to find an answer for it. How do they? This is a ship that's supposed to just drift through space. So how do they navigate to Korriban of all places? Right? Like that was another one.
Exactly. So let's just go conveniently.
Well, convenient. The force led them there. Convenient.
Right. And but there has to be something, because that's like the joke, right? In a lot of like Star Wars novels too. It's always like a small galaxy. It's just like, oh, yeah, look at that. We just conveniently came upon the checkpoint. The next paragraph. Like you were saying, Joe, like you have to have an answer now.
Yeah. And there's a lot of questions that the EU left.
And it turned your quest in turn, like with the team, like it made everyone, like, obviously not scholars, but yes, like Star Wars scholars, right? Because then we were out there hunting answers, and you and Ed and stuff, like talked to a lot of people who had worked in development with those games to like get all of their end notes and all of their thoughts that they've had from conversations together. And it's because all that stuff is like that. I don't think I'm using the correct term, fourth dimensional art, but all that stuff that gets lost in the sauce during the actual creation, right? Probably not using the correct term, forgive me. And that's what had to be found to even to develop from that and like make it work. And that's your magical gift as a writer.
Thank you for saying that, Kyle. And I won't take full credit because beyond you guys, like there were a lot of fans with a lot of really good ideas on different forums that I read because I'm interested in what the fans have to say about these things, because I think they oftentimes have more clever ideas than the creatives have. Like those professionally in charge of doing these things. So I've always been of the mindset, listen to what the fans are saying. They may not, always be on the mark, but a lot of times they are. And so with a lot of these questions, and people would actually even write to me and say, hey, I've always thought that this made sense. It's like, oh, that's interesting. That's really clever. I think a really clever retcon for this thing. I either never thought of it or I was thinking along similar lines. To me, like that's a healthier when writers and editors and those in charge have a more open approach to fandom. When they're in touch with fans, I just think there's a synergy that you don't get when the property just closes itself off and puts a wall, between the two. And again, that's not to negate the writer's own sort of creative juices. Like, and I've never felt stifled by continuity or by the rules that came before. Like, not once. Those things, having a history in place actually allows you to be more creative, I think. And yes, it requires research, but that's really, when people say that they don't like continuity, they're really just railing against the idea of having to do research.
Yes, and they don't want to do the time. They don't want to put in the
That's the
time.
creative freedom that,
yes, I can just start from point A and we're good.
right. It's not a blank page is a blank page. It's you can stare at a blank page for hours, and you have to fill that in. When you already have a map, when that's already there, that's a beautiful thing, because then all you have to do is just add to it and explore it, because there are so many corners and so many spaces. I mean, here lie dragons, and like what is, like, there's so much room. The as much as has been written in the EU, people think, oh, it's so crowded. Look at all those books behind Kyle. As much, it's like, as much as that's like the tip of the iceberg of what could be told, because a universe is a giant place. Planets are giant places. History is long.
Yes.
I mean,
that was like the mark of getting into this universe too, was the fact that people can say what they want, but it was still formally licensed and pushed out there that it was all connected. And it's like, that was the beauty of this universe, is because no other brand that I'm aware of has gone to that extent anyway and been able to keep it together. And that's why it was A, unique, and B, like the whole draw and your dedication to it seemed worth it, because it's just like, it's so big. Like, even this entire thing right here, it's just like, okay, so that's a couple, perhaps 100 people out of trillions. Just like you said, it's just like, so where's all the other stories? Because there's so much meat. We could have like 85 novels right in between, right here.
Yeah.
And it would all be relevant and completely separate yet connected. And like, that's again, that's the reason why you fall in love with this in the first place, is because that essentially it's the one thing that wouldn't end. We all know that everything good comes to an end, but the idea was like, what you loved is the purpose of it is to continuously ever get bigger and bigger and fill you in and let you live there. Mm-hmm. And that was like a comfort for a lot of people, I think. And people who are invested into anything like this, I think, are always invested into art. And they really sincerely appreciated the artist who made this happen for us. And it's like it continues to show in our community. And I think that's like the whole reason why we're doing like a lot of the things that we're doing currently, is to make sure that stays alive.
Yeah.
And that's what we're celebrating. And I think that's what your book, Joe, is like essentially celebrating too. Like, there'll be a lot of thoughts on it, and everybody's gonna be a critic, and there's gonna be those who love it and all that and hate it. But at the same time, it's your way of recognizing everyone somehow. 1,000 pages, 3 books, really. Manages to unite everyone, and I hope that people really understand it and give it thought, and like where you're coming from.
Thank you. I hope so as well. It's just one part. It's one part of what we're all doing. I mean, with you guys doing LegendsCon, that's another really big part, because it draws together. It brings us, to a physical location where we can meet each other, and we can talk about the thing that we love, and we can listen to panels and presentations where, this thing is celebrated. That's really, it's a huge, like you said, it's a monumental endeavor that from 1977 to 2014, thereabouts, that you had this one story that we were all on this train. as fans. Like we were all on this train enjoying this thing. Or maybe not all parts of it. That's nothing.
There were some stops
nothing
that
is
people were
perfect.
like, "Where the hell are we at?"
Yeah. That's fine. There's certain train cars that you that's not for you. So you whatever, you don't go in there.
Yeah, we'll be somewhere else in like 2 months. Don't worry.
Mhm.
But that's the beauty of the expanded universe was that there's people who haven't dipped into it, or they only dipped into it and they jumped out again. They don't realize like it does cater to every kind of fan, every kind of reader, because it has such variety in it.
Yep.
On a lot of levels. And because these are, look at all these different voices. These are all different authors, and yes, it went through the same approvals channel, but they were pretty loose with that. They Lucasfilm allowed a lot of different, going way back to when Carol Titleman was first in charge. The only things that they prevented were things that were going to contradict the movies or other things, that currently, in place. And sometimes things slip through, and then, you had authors come in like Abel and others, to sort of patch those things up. So, if you were deep in the EU, you saw that process happening. Because oftentimes it would happen in the magazines. It would happen in games.
Yeah.
Insider.
Yeah.
Insider. But if you didn't go as deep into that, you didn't. You I don't want to say you missed out, but you missed on seeing how those things occurred. All the patches. You missed. Oh well, that was fixed. It seems like a contradiction, but it actually was fixed in this issue.
Mm.
And some people say, well, I don't have the time or I don't have the money. That's fine. You're again, your fandom is your fandom. But it's enough to know that it was fixed.
Yeah.
And that this was a living universe in which the authors were paying attention by and large, and the editors were paying attention and trying to keeping it feeling real. That's what makes this so enjoyable ultimately, is that okay? So in the Black Fleet Crisis, who's the author of that? That's QB McDowell. I think it's Michael QB McDowell.
QB McDowell. Yeah, Michael P. Q. McDowell.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I just murdered that name. Forgive me. But you get me.
So he sends this. Check this out. So he sends this proposal to Lucasfilm as to what the story is going to be, and it's going to involve Chewbacca's family. He has a different conception. He envisions Wookiees as being more polygamous.
Okay.
Lucasfilm sends him the Wookiee storybook from 1978. The Wookiee storybook, and says, this is Chewbacca's family.
Yeah.
So, you've got Lumpy and you've got Mala.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's what this is all about. That's what makes this so amazing, is that they would do that and say, hey, no, actually, yeah, we've got, Chewie's family was first established here back in 1978 in this kid's book. That's brilliant to me. Because that's what continuity is all about. It's a beautiful thing. And I've never understood people who see it as some kind of impediment, or because it's not. It never has. But all right, so we didn't get Wookiees as a polygamous race. Okay. But you can develop another race that is.
Yeah.
It's not hampering creativity. You could just make a new race, because there's room for that. There's room for anything under the sun. That's what space opera is unique in that regards, in that there are so many genres that you can incorporate in it, because there are very few rules other than keep it interesting, keep it entertaining, which is what good literature should anyway. But so you can have romance, you can have science fiction, you can have horror, you can have drama, you can have all of these things. and have fun with it. And it all fits because space opera is that kind of genre, and all voices are welcome in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no elitism. That's, I think, the word I'm trying to say, and spending too long saying it.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're okay. and it's like when people try to dismiss it, it's just like, if you can be like the devil's advocate to it, it's just like, say like so forget, because everything you just said is the entire purpose, and I feel that everyone involved with it, whether or not they liked it, honored the administration, and were there for all the right reasons, right? And then for those who dismiss all of that work that they did, it's just like, you cannot tell me that these people were all employed with the intention of, yes, doing a good job and making us money. And so for you to think that like all of this was just some kind of a sham, and it was just like everybody going in every which way just to like, crank something, it's just like you all missed the point. And I'm really sad that it's hard for them to accept it. It's just like, it was a business as well. And everything that you just said, they were there for all of the right reasons. But it's like, yes, and we're creating this to make sure that it succeeds. So there's when they dismiss it anyway, it's just like, do you think that they were just purposely throwing money away? Like, is that, I'm not sure if I articulated that well enough, but I'm just trying to say, it's just like, what are you talking about? That it was all just like kind of pointless and whatever. It's just like, no, like from a business point, they wanted us to have something that we could invest our time and money in, and so they did it very well. So all the spiritualism, even if those people who just like don't care about all of that, it's just like, well, you still cannot like just push it out the door because like money. I'm trying to say, like, look at that angle too. It was all done with intent, and the letters that Chris Nelson pulled out not too long ago, I believe, if memory serves. And it was the letters to like KB Toys, I think it was, right when they were introducing the Shadow of the Empire project, and fan relations was just like, hey, look at all this, guys. Like, I'm trying to like put this in very quick terms, but it's just like, so and so's got this part, so and so the video game is going to be over here. It's all going to be one big story, and it's marketing. And so for them to just downplay it all as like it just did not even matter, and it was just like none of that. It's just like, that is just not true.
Yeah.
Like there is evidence and intent and a lot of money that was made over the decades.
Yeah.
Like people like to say, what kept it alive? We did by saying, yes, give us your money. This is awesome. Yeah. And thank you for making it. And so to
circle,
not just pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To circle back.
I think I went through
I do want to talk more about Supernatural Encounters story itself.
Sorry.
So that we got a bit more of that. But I would love to know, who was your favorite character that you wrote about?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. There's a few. All of the architects, the three of them, Talatni, Cold Dandasign, and Splendid App. I just love those guys. I loved them when I first read them in Alan Moore's Talatni Throws a Shape. And I loved spending time with them, like getting to know them. They're just so interesting and so quirky and so different, the three of them. And yet they're siblings. And they, like if you've had siblings that don't have your personality that you've had to sort of get along with, you'll understand that. But they're powerful, so they have godlike powers, which also makes them dangerous. It's so interesting, so interesting. So I loved working with them. Q9, of course, and Arhul.
Yes. Sorry.
Who they're sort of they don't like, their journey is only in sort of part of the book, but I so enjoyed their conversations because I like I like dialogue where you have two different perspectives being discussed or debated. I like that in anything that I watch. Um, because you get to hear different points of view from characters that are both intelligent and both have a perspective that makes sense. Um, and I we don't, it's like we were saying earlier today, like we don't get that as much in the real world because everything so quickly devolves into fighting and mudslinging. So it's a joy to see it in fiction where that doesn't happen. And even there's a scene, even not with Arhul and Q9, but I forgot, of course I forgot the race now.
Kyle, what
But
was it?
they're with an enemy. An enemy race has basically come down to say, do this or die, or you will die. We will literally set you on fire. And they have this conversation, and it didn't occur to me then, but it occurred to me now. And in the last draft I did, I was like looking at that and I'm saying, oh, it's so interesting. Like they managed, even though like this one group is the oppressor and this other group is the oppressed, like they managed to maintain a really interesting conversation and debate between them where they actually can see each other's points of view.
Mhm.
Before it all goes to, before the violence comes into the thing.
And there's a couple of them when they just come down to conquer. Because I'm like, are you talking about the Ansa, or are you talking about? I'm trying to figure out which one exactly we're talking about here.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of this going on as far as,
yeah, that's what it is. So there's a lot of that because I miss that. I miss like people actually talking about things that are important. And just again having different perspectives, sometimes very conflicting. And that's one of the running themes that throughout Supernatural Encounters is there's a running dialogue about how do you live ethically in a world that is unethical, in which death is the end of all things, seemingly so. Like there are different answers to that question. Like how do you deal with violence? Do you do so violently? Do you do so non-violently? Are there times where violence is an acceptable response to violence? Um, I just those just that's why there's so much dialogue, within the book is looking at that. Like what is the nature of government is another one. What should be the nature of government? When does a government overstep their bounds, and what do we do about it? Like these are questions Star Wars itself has raised in the films, and so it's just sort of taking that a step further. What is there's is there, and then we go into the metaphysical realm.
yes.
Is there a metaphysical realm, and if so, what does it mean? um and what does that have to do with our actions? So those are the kinds of questions that I'm interested in and I wanted to see explored, and which this book does. And in a lot of different from a lot of different areas and circumstances. So I'll be curious to see what everybody thinks about the sort of the more philosophical aspects that are put forward. Because it's not, anyone who thinks that Star Wars is just pew pew or in a way, I
That's
think missing
most
the
what people
point.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and look, you can certainly enjoy the films on that level, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to get into all of this, the books and even the deeper levels in the films. Like that's not a requirement. Everybody is on their own journey, and I absolutely don't mean to denigrate anybody who that's what they're into. I'm a big fan of the band Black Sabbath, and I once had a conversation with a guy who was another fan, who said to me, "Dude," because I was getting into like the lyrics and like the depth that's there that Geezer Butler had brought to that, and the guy's like, "Dude, I'm just into the music," like, and it took me aback initially, and then I thought about it. I'm like, yeah, that's perfectly legitimate. Not everybody has to go deep into these things. But when you do go into literature, when you do go into books, I think books have the opportunity to go there. And that's what I've always enjoyed about, when I read The Lord of the Rings, as an example, or when I read Clark Ashton Smith, there are these layers that I find fascinating, and I didn't necessarily catch them on a first reading or a first read through. It was, and there's certain films like that too, like where I have to watch them a few times. If you guys haven't had the chance, Andrew Garfield's Under the Silver Lake is one that I've been obsessing over lately, because that film is there's so much going on behind the scenes, and I could watch that over and over again. And I have David Lynch's work,
Yes.
I
Blue
have
Velvet.
Velvet and Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive and no, it's Mulholland Drive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Where just watch them again and again, and I just get something different out of them each time. And I like that kind of thing. The Shining, Kubrick's work, Eyes Wide Shut, like that's the kinds of things where I just, yeah, I when I first saw them, I enjoyed them on a certain level, and then rewatching them multiple times, and I just was able to kind of go down these rabbit holes. So that's what Supernatural Encounters essentially is sort of drawing from. It's that, and then it's sort of, sort of these ethical, philosophical questions that have always intrigued me since I was a kid. Since I was telling the guys recently, I got a chance to rewatch the Billy Jack series.
Oh yeah.
Loaded with this dialogue, these philosophical debates about how to live in this world under an oppressive system. If you've never seen the original, Lisa, oh, you've got to see the original Billy Jack from 1971. Tom Laughlin, who starred in it, directed it, produced it, wrote it, changed the way Hollywood films are actually distributed and advertised. At the time, they didn't have universal advertisement on television. It was just local.
Okay.
He changed that. He made that to what we have today. Same with distribution. It would just kind of come out locally, different theaters, and it would expand. There's a documentary on YouTube, a short one that you can watch, which talks about that. And that's still one of the top 50 all-time top 10 all-time independent films, when adjusted for inflation. But so anyway, it's that kind of depth that I enjoy, where you can totally take something on a surface level, have fun with it, and walk away, and that's great.
Yeah.
But if you want to go deeper, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, it's there.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Okay. So
no shovel required.
yeah. So why is the information that Arhul brings, why is it put on trial? And who's at the trial?
So a lot of the historians that the EU has had over the years are all there, and they're all very vocal. Leia's there because and Sindel is there. Sindel from the Ewoks films.
Yeah.
Because they all have a direct connection to the things that Arhul or Hex is bringing out.
Okay. Is Leia there because of Tuatni then?
Leia, yeah. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't read Tuatni Throws a Shape, Leia dies.
Mm-hmm.
Leia is killed.
Yeah.
I mean, she dies on screen. It's such a shocking moment. Like when you read it, I'm like, what?
Yeah. And she's all like twisted
so
and
real.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, she's dead. Yeah.
Her heart
she
is
dead.
turned into diamond. And then she's brought back afterwards, because it's considered it's considered untidy, or it's seen as a disorder. So the architects have this kind of crisis of conscience where they're first sort of like learning of their powers and seeing what their powers could do and what it means. So they basically, Horlus, who I left out of my earlier mention of the architects, although he ceases to be part of their group, which is a whole other story thread. But he basically and the others say, yeah, we kind of went a bit too far. So Splendid App, can you fix this? Gonna fix this for us because we're gonna head out now.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm still learning this stuff too. So that, like, again, in like these 3-4 pages, Alan Moore gives us so much about these characters that I was able to sort of develop, like, where do they go from there, and when did this happen, and what does it mean? So in any case, so you asked who else was there? Is there Sindil's there? What's his name? The shapeshifter from the Galaxy of Fear books. Hool. Mammon was there. Mammon was another great character.
Yeah,
I had fun writing. He's there with his wife.
she turned out to be quite a firecracker too.
She's great. She's
a
contribution. She was a contribution from Natalie Asplund, I believe, who's a graphic artist and illustrator. She's going into animation in Canada, so watch out for her because she's amazing.
And she's Canadian, so watch out. Right?
Yeah, I can.
Early on, when I wanted to get Supernatural Encounters illustrated and wanted to raise money for it, one of the top tier perks of contribution was being able to kind of have, you know, your own character or name or kind of idea in the book, because I had so much, I had so many characters that either didn't have proper names yet or didn't have names at all. Yep. And so she told me about this sort of fan fiction character that she had created, and it was amazing, and she had illustrations of them, and I was like, yeah, let's why not, let's incorporate that. And there's a lot from different like fan things that I wanted to bring in, or things that were of questionable canonicity. Yeah. But why not bring it all in?
Yeah,
if it can fit. Not everything can, but if it can fit, why are we being so exclusive and exclusionary to these things? I've never understood that. You know, for me, stories are about, particularly in a shared universe, again, quality and continuity. And if it has those two things, why are we saying, oh no, we're not sure what the continuity level was on this particular magazine from 1980? Who cares? Who cares? Bring it in. It was written to be part of this thing. You know, it's in this RPG magazine. Just bring it in. So anyway, that was my approach to all of that, because I you know, these fans count. These stories count. You know, when you love the community and when you love story, you don't leave people out of it. You know, as you know, again, as long as they're playing by the rules and the whole thing.
So what happens with the trial?
What happens is they're furious at the idea that this manuscript that Hex left behind has any legitimacy to it whatsoever. It upends their theories about, you know, what the ancient past was, and
what the histories of the galaxies were.
yeah, like it's all just fantasy to them. Like this is a fairy tale. Why are we taking this seriously?
Yeah,
you know, like we know, and you know, we see this in any institution, you know, these days, that isn't open to new ideas. We see it in the science establishment. You know, we see it across the board. So it was, you know, it was a very realistic depiction of this sort of phenomena that we don't want to be challenged on this point. We think this is ridiculous. We have our own books and studies and things that we're promoting that we have accepted. So that's the debate, and it gets very heated, which is fascinating. But I also think it's important to present other perspectives, and so everybody gets their say. Maybe Hex did lose his mind. Maybe it is all a fever dream or parts of it. As the reader, you determine what makes sense for you, and what doesn't ultimately. But so they read the manuscript through, from pretty much from beginning to end, with occasional interruptions in between, from those who are just like, this is ridiculous. Why are we wasting our time here with this?
Yeah.
Lots of outrage.
And that's, I won't go beyond that, because that there is a culmination point to this whole thing, which I won't get into because that comes sort of at the end and would be spoilerish. But yeah, so that's what the trial is about.
Okay. Is there a judge that you created, or is it someone that was already existing?
Tim Ellis,
Okay.
who already exists. Yeah. So pretty much most of them already existed. There were a few characters I introduced, and some that I guess were fan introductions, but by and large, they're from the EU, and they have to have their say.
Yeah.
I thought Ellis was a good choice too. Pretty solid choice.
Who do you think was a good choice?
Tim Ellis.
Oh yeah, Tim is great. Yeah, he's always waving his tentacles about.
Yeah. There was a lot of little cameos when you're just like, well done, sir.
Yeah. So for the listeners, when was this story set? Like, when was the trial in place?
In Kyle, you can double check me on this. Is it 38 ABY?
Correct. It's after Darknest.
I think it's after Darkness, but before the Legacy of the Force series begins.
That's where it stands. That's where it stands now.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, because we have basically there's some arguments of why they're getting to things now, and all these revelations that even occurred. They're like, well, why didn't we talk about it years ago? And it's just like, well, because you kind of had like the uprising with the Chiss here, that whole situation.
Yeah.
There
was a lot going on.
Yeah, because people have a tendency to like look at Darkness. I think Troy, you're a great guy. I love your work actually a lot, but I think that
we talk about Troy on here often.
Yeah. He's one day going to come on and just ream us, and I'll give him full permission to say whatever he wants, because it's like, I personally really enjoy a lot of things that he does, and the purpose of that book wasn't all about Jason, but that's what affected the events of Supernatural Encounters too. But the fact that that almost skirmish with the Chiss and all that occurs was definitely the modern topical events that just simply got in the way of shaking all this stuff out. So I think that you use that in a decent way too.
Yeah.
Kind of like, because that's what's happening in real time now. We have a lot of serious issues as a nation to get to, but it's just, there's so many other things that are just, sorry, like, we can only get to one crisis at a time. We can only get to one mystery at a time. We can only invest so much time into every mystery we find. And I think that was kind of a really good topical smokescreen, so to speak, to set the stage, if you would.
There was a question that some fans had, like, because Abeloth is a character.
Yeah.
And why didn't they know about Abeloth if she's mentioned in Hex's manuscript? And that's because Abeloth is known in Hex's manuscript by her original name.
Talat.
I won't say. I will not speak of this to confirm or deny.
Hey, it's why I wore green today. I'm celebrating Talatni.
Oh, nice. Very cool. I love how Talatni's hair just sort of like,
Yeah, it's always flowing and stuff. Yeah. It's like a river of fire. Yeah. I like
yes, like fire or water,
Yeah.
you know. And her temperament is both.
Oh,
She
similar.
has chaos elements about her because she is so impassioned. And that's when you understand why she is the way she is. You start to, I think, better understand who she is, you know, and why she does the things she does, why they all do the things they do. I endlessly fascinating, the whole thing, and the seeds of it are all in Moore's work, but
And you kept that the same thing that we see with his work is something that you kept there too, as far as there's an innocence about them,
yeah,
you know. There and it's yeah, I think he touched on a lot of without giving a lot of things away. It's just like trauma, like you said, and it's just like the fact that pain caused growth, but it doesn't always grow in the right direction. And you know,
well said. Yeah,
um, yeah, and I he stayed true to them because that's like when they kill Leia, it's just like, oh, that's death. Oh gosh, and I feel bad. Oh, like fix it, but like I don't care enough to do anything about it right now because I'm not going to admit that I
right.
feel anything. But you do it, and I want you to for reasons that I can't explain. You know, and
Yeah,
that's
their little sibling rivalry is so fascinating to me, you know, and there's so what Moore was doing with that. I wrote an essay about this in one of the Sequart and Star Wars anthologies, which is that Moore was kind of having each one represent different art styles. So Talatni is traditional art, and Cole Dan the Sign is Dada art, and Splendid App is abstract art.
Oh, okay.
Horless is and it's escaping me at the moment the names, but they each represent these different art periods, and the arguments that aficionados of those styles would have with each other. Hey, kitty.
He grabbed me because I ignored him.
And also the relationships that each had with each other. And that's again, he does this in like 4 or 5 pages, and it's all like really like legit, like it's a legit argument about art. And when they emerged, so that was fascinating. But and it also like propels like their rivalry, like how they view themselves, how they view each other. Like I don't know, it gets very deep, but it's really really interesting if you know have a proclivity towards getting into the weeds. I don't know what we were talking about. I just completely went off a tangent there, just because like these characters tend to do that when I talk
yeah.
about them. I go, my mind goes to these into the weeds, you know.
We started with Palatny, I believe, the innocence of the siblings. I know we jumped to there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
yeah, all
innocent.
the same. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so that's another. So if they're innocent, and even though they do things that are really harmful, so they're not, are they true, are they're not the true antagonists in this story, and that's another thing that you learn. So if you've only ever read the beta version that was released online, that extra layer of who the actual enemies are in the story, like the Cosmic Wars, which Archie Goodwin started off. I hear cats screaming.
Wow. Yeah. Or,
I don't. Someone else is getting into that. Sometimes they fight.
They're cats.
So the Cosmic Wars was never really defined in the EU other than the name of it. So I broke it down into 3 basic wars: the Empyrean Wars, the War of Temporal Planes, and then the Twilight Wars. But there's a catalyst to these, and the readers of the beta version will naturally assume it's the architects and it's Talatny and that gang, and they're certainly a large part of it. But there's another underlying factor, and that was also hinted at in issue 5 of the original Marvel series, where Darth Vader references the immortal gods of the Sith.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
And this is one of those throwaway lines. No one ever picked up on that or went anywhere with it throughout the history of the EU. But I had the opportunity to actually make them characters and show what their role was, and their connection to the Sith and their connection to other ancient races. And this is what propels the Cosmic Wars. This is where it sort of ends a sort of period of innocence, and brings on a period of basically eternal wars. You know, from not eternal, but ongoing.
As the pantheons converge.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are the main players in this thing, and their underlings. So the old ones being a part of, one of those underlings, which ties, and the old ones, of course, tie into sort of like Lovecraftian sort of a fiction, which is another open crossover, because again, that's the oldest EU crossover is that. So why not make sense of that? Why not bring that into greater focus? And if again, if you've never read that stuff, great. It's fine. It's all, you won't be lost. But if you have read it, any of that stuff, then you'll see it in a different. That's all.
And I think by saying it that way too, it's just like, yes, that is one of the oldest crossovers. And it's not ironic that or I guess it is ironic rather, that it survived in present canon. Typhlosion was brought along into the present canon for a very direct reason. So
yes. Yep. Yeah, that's a story for another day. But yeah.
Yep.
Typhlosion wasn't my creation. It was the name I gave to Pomojima.
Yeah.
Because Pomojima has a very tribal sounding name, and if you understand the Koei, and what had happened to them, it made sense that he would have an earlier name. And of course, if you recognize that he's Cthulhu, then he has an even earlier name. So again, it's just building layers. That cat is just too cute for words.
He's a cuddle bunny. Yeah. Gotta pay attention. I'm sorry. It's just,
oh, don't
he
be.
will break the door down to get in here.
I've got 4 of my own. So yeah. 1 pooch.
4 is a tall order, sir. I had 6 for almost a year at one point.
Yeah.
14.
Yeah, you remember.
14 right here. So
yeah.
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 You have to tell me your secrets to how to maintain.
There's a lot of work.
There's probably no nice things.
Yeah. I'm fought over often, so at least I'm popular somewhere. It's with all my animals.
They're the best.
So Kyle and I were talking about some things before we got started today. And I don't know if you want to talk about this or if you can talk about it, but the Gungans, they kind of have a random start in history that I thought was just kind of interesting, that if we could talk about that.
Have you gotten to the chapter where...
No. I'm sorry.
That was actually a one-off in our conversation today too. I think that hasn't been gone over quite yet before. It's up to you there on that one, Joe.
Yeah, we've never discussed the Gungans publicly. That is,
right.
I just, Lucas saw them as a noble race, and everything that you do when you're extrapolating from another person's work, you have to seriously pay attention to what that person's intent was, and what their themes are that are important to them. And in the end notes, you'll see the connections there in terms of where certain themes do go directly back to Lucas, and the things that interested him and the things that he felt were important. And they may surprise people who haven't read a lot of his interviews or have only seen a few things. He goes deep. So the Gungans was an area where, you could easily be like, oh, Jar Jar was not popular and was considered ridiculous and, blah, blah, blah. I don't personally care about that. Like, whatever your opinion or my opinion of Jar Jar is, has nothing to do with this. This race were portrayed as a noble race. And I thought it was important to maintain that their origins be noble, their story be noble.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think Jar Jar, for all his silliness, has noble intent.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
he's a good heart.
He's got a good heart.
Yeah.
His mind is another matter, but he was made a senator, and he made this decision to give Palpatine power, and it was the wrong decision. And that, Lucas did that on purpose. He's purposely putting a good-hearted but ultimately foolish person in a position of authority who can be manipulated into doing something that has dire consequences. So, but the Gungans have a storied history that is interesting and that is, I don't know, I think fascinating. I don't want to go into the specifics of it, other than if you've read any of any EU stuff that goes into some of their ancient lore, that's all there, but extrapolated, but given more depth and breadth and story to go along with it. Because a lot of times, a lot of things get lost in magazine articles or mentions here and there. And you've got to, like, to put them in a narrative framework, you've got to take all those pieces, you've got to put them together before you, and then you've got to say, okay, now how did this work out chronologically? Where do the pieces fit? What does it mean? And then from there you can then flesh out a story.
Yeah.
And like Supernatural Encounters that didn't have the space, with all its 1,000 pages, didn't have the space to flesh out things to the point where, like a novel could. But it at least put them all in the same place, where now you can follow the story of the Gungans. And then if somebody ever does want to write a novel about their history, it's there. They can expand even further on that.
Something tells me that that will indeed happen.
There's
where
a lot
the pieces fall now, I think that we will definitely see something.
There's a lot of races that are like that. A lot, because Star Wars has tons. And while my focus was more on the lesser known ones, like the Cephi play a lot. They just play a huge role. I mean, look, Leland Shee determined that every pointy-eared, humanoid race was a Cephi. And the Cephi in the comics are very, very elvish. So, and that Darko McCann, when he wrote Jedi versus Sith, kind of, he plays on that a little bit. So, again, all right. So if that's the case, then how do the Cephi behave, as an ancient race? I know. So yeah, there are in that sense, there are Tolkienian influences there. It doesn't mean that they're the same. They're not Tolkien's elves,
Yeah.
but they're
Right.
inspired, they're inspired by, because he's the first one to basically define, what this race is.
Yeah.
And like, I'll give you an example is the Neti. So the Neti are a
Yeah.
tree race named after the Ents. They
Oh,
just
yeah.
they just scrambled the letters and added the I for the plural.
Yep.
So now it doesn't mean they are Ents.
Yeah.
They're not Ents, because the Ents have their own history in the ancient past. Because remember, like, Middle Earth is our Earth in the ancient past. So they're not Ents, and the Sephi are not. They're not Noldor. They're not, Quenya. Quenya is the language.
Yeah.
They're not. They're not the ancient elves of Tolkien's
Yeah.
Middle Earth.
Who are based off of Finlanders, by the way.
That's right.
Me.
Ah,
Yeah. Because he studied the Kalevala, which is like a 2,000 verse epic poem from Finland. It's like our kind of like version of would be like Norse mythology. It's Finland's version of that event. So Vanamainen is what Gandalf is based off of, and like there's a lot of things that are like, that he took. And then when I first watched it on screen, and then they had the Elvish language, I was like, oh hey, they're just speaking Finnish, like. So, but yeah, that's why they're all blonde and in the woods and antisocial. It's so like Finlanders.
well, that's why his story has such depth and such richness to it. Is it's coming from a lot of places,
Yeah.
mythological places, biblical places, and even, which a lot of people don't know about, but even contemporary fantasy, science fiction, and horror, which Tolkien read. Tolkien was actually a lot more well read than people credit him for. There's a new book out called Tolkien's Modern Reader or Modern Reading, which goes into
I heard of that
the
coming.
books on his library.
Okay.
So you'll see Clark Ashton Smith is one of those books, and the writing styles are very similar. And some of the story points, some of the story beats are not the same, but you can see where he's drawing inspiration. Lord Dunsany, another one. So Tolkien had a rich well upon which to draw. And I think that is a great example for anyone who wants to be a professional writer, which I know right now, because of the publishing industry, is so ridiculously hard to break into. But regardless, whether you self-publish or whether you decide to, try that route of getting an agent and breaking in, is to be well-read, is to follow Tolkien's example and read as much as you can from different genres, even outside of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, just to have that in you, because that all somehow comes out. Like if you've dived into those things will all come out unconsciously 9 times out of 10, and sometimes consciously as well. So I've come across things where I'm like, oh, that sounds a lot like this, and I didn't realize it wasn't conscious. It was like, oh, all right, I must have been thinking somehow about that thing.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the introduction of humans into the galaxy and how that kind of came about.
Bum, bum, bum! Sorry.
So the idea was basically that, so Star Wars has all of these Earthian things to it. And did we discuss, were we discussing this privately earlier about, Stackpole's books, or was that while we
no, I think that was on this episode here, because I think we actually walked down another rabbit hole and didn't come back to it necessarily. I think that's what we did. So I don't know, Lisa, where you want?
So there has to be a reason.
It's been a long episode.
Yeah. There has to be a reason why you have humans and you have human Earthian culture and Earthian terminology and it's not just this isn't just a translation of English to basic or basic to English. It isn't just that. Because if you or I were to go to Micronesia right now and spend time with the natives there, you would find it extremely different culture than you would here. I mean, in a lot of parts of the world that aren't westernized, you're going to find what appears like very alien-like cultures. But when you read through the EU, when you see Star Wars, what you see is very Western, is very Western humans
Yeah.
in many regards. Why? That was the question that I had set out to answer. And the answer that I had found, which has to do with Talatni and the architects, was the fact that they brought humans here. They started that, and they started that with a very specific purpose in mind, which is maybe too complex to sort of go into here, but which the book goes into great depths about. There is a reason that they do this. They bring humans, to
Is it
the
for
galaxy.
chaos or just?
That's a part of it. Like, that's a large part of it, is to introduce. So Talatni, to go very basic. So Talatni feels like she's been robbed. She's been robbed of her rightful destiny as ruler of, the galaxy, of what's known as Sky River. Sky River, by the way, comes from the EU, comes from the old Marvel comics. That's the name given to the galaxy. So she believes that her father, who's a celestial, basically denied her this. Okay. Not only that, but like violently, tried to kind of cut her off. So she's got a chip on her shoulder. And she wants to set up a scenario in which the Celestials are displaced and she can come in as sort of the savior after the galaxy has turned away from the Celestials as being ineffectual.
Like,
because
not,
they're completely nonviolent. They won't lift a hand, according to her, to do anything about the problems that she introduces. So there's a little bit of like a false flag thing happening there with her, with
Yeah.
what she sets up, which
And
sets in motion. But she
it's not
doesn't
so simple.
realize. What's that, Kyle?
It's like, it's not so simple that, like, her intention is not just to destroy them or to defeat them per se. It's to nullify them.
It is. It is.
Okay.
It's to nullify their power, because she believes that they're evil because of the treatment that she herself has received. Now, the fact that that's a misinterpretation of events doesn't matter, because her mindset becomes she's so driven and so almost one-sided in the way she views things. And there's an element of fear that she doesn't want to feel like she's wrong. She's been wronged. She's the victim here. So she's never going to let that happen again. She's going to be the victor. So I feel like she's very relatable in many regards. I feel like she is. I think a lot of people can relate to her and to all of them.
Yep.
And it's not, by the way, it's not that there's a misconception that all villains are sort of misunderstood misanthropes. That's not the case. Some people simply don't. They are villains because they don't care about the question. They don't care that something is right or wrong. They only care about their own self-aggrandizement, and they will step on and destroy anyone that gets in the way of that. So I do believe in that idea that there are actual villains and there are actual evil people. I just don't think Talatni and the architects are in that category. So she wants to create a scenario of chaos, where the galaxy will see the truth, and then she will come in as savior, and they will elevate her to her rightful place.
Yeah.
But she doesn't
Beloved
know.
Queen of the Stars.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's a Sabbath card that's actually, named after her, the Queen of Light and Darkness. I forgot the name of it, but in any case, your viewers will know. But there's a Pandora's box element to this.
Yeah.
Her as
That's why I brought up humans, because my next question was it just men, or was women introduced afterward, like Pandora?
No, it was both.
Okay.
Both.
Yes.
Humans were brought, men and women, because Talani wanted them to populate.
Yeah. Okay.
And she kind of helps that along a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
She wants.
She definitely pulls up. No, that's a really rough reference. I was going to say she pulls up with the van. Basically, that's what they do, because they don't just take them out. Everything's deeper. Like, they don't just necessarily kidnap them.
No, not at all.
That's not her style. She's just like, you will want to do this, and that seems to be her true
power.
Intent.
Yeah.
She's like, she doesn't want it easy.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, they see, again, it's a case of, like, there's always this partial information. They see what's going on. So because they come to this Earth, our Earth, they see the situation here. So they're clearly like, oh, we can do much better. We can do better for these people. And this will also serve our purposes. So it's not like they're completely using humans in that regard. They actually do believe that they're giving them something greater. It's just that they don't realize that they're unleashing something else, because something happens when they do that that's related to what we were talking about earlier with the immortal gods of the Sith. Because there's a direct connection between humans and them. So Talani creates a scenario that she wasn't quite prepared for. Things are not as simple as she thought that they would be. And this also creates a bit of a fraction's the right word, a bit of a dissension between her and her siblings, who have their own interests and have their own ideas about what they want to do, with this life that they have. And then there's this lost brother of theirs, Horlus, who, has created this other sort of dilemma with them, and it's part of their brokenness. So there's such a web, and it's such a mess that's created, and it leads to this great tragedy, which is the cosmic wars, and the roles that the races play in it, what sides they take. So you've got what I delineated as 4 different approaches to how do we deal with this now, this sudden change, this war that's come about. Do we just maintain a pacifist stance, not necessarily a passive one, but a pacifist, a nonviolent one? Do we get involved and violently oppose this oppressive force that the architects have unleashed on the galaxy? Do we join with this power, this rising power in the galaxy? Maybe they're right. Maybe Talatni and the architects are right. They know Talatni is Anrai, by the way, which, if you remember from the old Marvel comics, was the goddess. And just later on, the name Anrai vanished, and it was just the goddess, which entered a lot of different cultures, and races. And the 4th one, do we withdraw from all of this? We don't want anything to do with any of the rest of you now. We're going to become completely insular. So those are the 4 different approaches that the races take. And that interaction is what takes up sort of the bulk of the ancient stories of the ancient past, as we visit with different races, sometimes just for a moment, and sometimes for a little bit of more of an extended vignette, to see like what it means, and how it all led to how we know them in the present.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
That's why this thing is 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, I mean, because there's a lot involved. I mean,
I think you handled that pretty well there, bud.
you know, had Lucasfilm, and if Lucasfilm ever does come back on board, because you know they did sign off on this. I did sign licensing, you know, papers, which I have and I have shared. But had they been on board with this is something that we could have developed. It's a whole new era. You know, the Cosmic Wars is a whole new era in which you could have a whole bunch of books, you know, that different things. And
Yep.
you know, and if fans want to do that on their own, and I've already heard that some are, you know,
Oh, it's happening.
yeah, I mean, great. I'll like so StarWarsTimeline.net is my site. That's the site I've had since 92, 93.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an old
Hence the
time.
.net.
Yeah,
I've been visiting since 2000.
It came after Mike Beidler's timeline. It came after Jason Fry's, and it came after Rich Handley's card safe one. I had seen those 3 timelines when I first got online, and I'm friends with all of them, so I can say this. I didn't like any of them. I had issues with each one of those. Like Jason left out Splinter the Mind's Eye. He's like, oh, it doesn't fit. I'm like, no, it absolutely. Rich Handley and Mike Beidler were like they kind of denigrated the Marvel series a lot. They took it like it was and the early newspaper strips. Russ Manning, who's one of the early architects of the EU, who also had his hand in the pulps. But I loved all that stuff. I'm like, you can't denigrate this. Let readers have their own opinions on them. Don't make their opinions for them, because society tends to have a follow your leader mentality. So if somebody publicly says, "Oh, this is stupid," you know,
everyone else goes, "Yeah, it is stupid."
Everyone else, exactly. They may not have even read it, or maybe they read it and they thought, I didn't think it was so bad, but because the consensus seems to be that it's stupid, they're like, "Yeah, ha ha." But you know, so I don't like that. I like people to make up their own minds and share and debate those opinions. Absolutely. So that's why I didn't like this. So that's why I was like, I'm gonna make my own timeline, and I'm gonna make it as comprehensive as possible, and I'm not gonna denigrate anything. It all happened in the Star Wars universe somehow. So that site has now expanded to include lost works. Little did I know that mine was going to become one of those areas. But at least I had a place for it. I mean, so Heart of the Jedi comes from that, and Ryder Wyndham's unpublished Adventures in Hyperspace is on there, and a few other lost things, the Adventure Journals. Oh yeah, there it is.
Yep.
There.
I've got 2.
Nice.
That completely run of the mill, nothing suspicious.
I loved working with Ken on that book. He was the best. Is the best. He's still with us. He's a great guy. Yeah.
Mine's behind my Death Star. I love that you put it in a bag too.
I love it. That was serendipity or synchronicity, one or the other, you might say, where I said, there's got to be some remnant of this story online. And I went searching for it, and just at that time, Ken had released the first chapter on somewhere online. No one had seen it. Nobody knew about it. And I immediately wrote to him and said, Ken, since you're interested in putting this online, let's do it right. I'll edit it. I'll get it out there, the whole 9 yards. And he was like 100% on board.
That's awesome.
Was great. It was a great experience. So Yeah, you got to preserve these things. You know, people wrote them, they're licensed, they belong in the fold.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that like so many people like have copies now.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh
There-
yeah,
I can't remember
it's
what I
like it
was.
made the top 20, huh, on Amazon or something.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something I was researching one day. I can't remember what it was exactly, but like I couldn't find a reference anywhere because it was like, oh, defunct link, defunct link, defunct link. And then suddenly it took me to you, and I was like, of course Joe would have it. Like, yes, like, thank you, Joe. Like, you are
very cool.
you're the true keeper
it,
of the Helicron at this point. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Was it Skywalker's, Lisa? Because that
No,
was the big
it
problem.
may have been.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember-
Skywalker's vanished off of Abel's site, so I was like, oh well, he put it out there. I'm sure he won't. My Abel's a friend of
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
I remember we actually talked about that one too, because I was like, Joe, like, look, I know, but you know him and whatnot, but it's just like his website's down, and the only version of the book that I could get was it was off of a foreign website, so lots of clickbait and whatnot, and it would open up in a very archaic viewer, and I'm sure you saw it when you were looking it up there, Joe, and it was just, you had to like tab each page over to be able to continue the story, and it would refresh, and it was just, this is the worst way to ever read. And then you know, if you closed your browser, start over, you couldn't just type the page number in either. It's like, oh my god, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. And same with like
So
Star Wars Insider.
You preserve that for sure too, because that one was almost lost.
Yeah.
We have to preserve these things because if the fans don't, the powers that be won't. That's just the reality. I mean, this is legal. It's called archiving, because these stories will disappear. I don't just mean the lost ones, which, by the way, when I see John Whitman at LegendsCon, that's gonna be the first question I ask him, because I spoke to John years ago and I said, if you ever find the lost Jaina and the Hanadak story that you wrote, he wrote two, and it was Jason and some other creature. If you ever find them, let me know. But I lost his email because,
and I tried looking for him, Joe, and it's just it kept leading to dead ends and people saying pretty much like, just get off the beaten trail.
Yeah.
So it's the chance.
He's coming. He's coming. So I'm going to ask him, did you ever find these stories? Because I want to get them out there. We've got to get them into the public's hands.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's too easy for things to get lost. And to me, they're valuable. I don't care if it's a kid's book. It's valuable. It's a story. The story matters. That's just the bottom line. Like if you have the same passion, if you're watching us right now, then you understand this, that, you know, all of these books that you see behind Lisa, behind Kyle, they matter. They have meaning and they have relevance, and we need to keep them alive. And like those are being kept in print right now, but there's a lot that's not.
Yeah,
there's a lot that has gone out of print, went out of print years ago, long before Disney even was in the picture.
Yeah.
There are people doing this with even the video games. I need to track them down again. I had a link to some of these games because some of the platforms are vanishing.
Yeah, I was going to say Jude Watson's, and Young Adventures. Yeah.
They brought it back in the E format, and it's like that's not the same as, that's not this.
So join our Discord server. You know, be a part of that, because we are preserving these things, and I will try and keep them all on my website. You know, and take them, you know, download them and keep them, share them with your friends. And that's how Supernatural Encounters is being distributed. It's free to the public. You know, it's because it belongs to the public. These stories belong to them. It belongs to you guys, all the fans. And you know, if Lucasfilm decides that they do want to do something with this, great. They still have that opportunity to, and I will reach out to Dan, and I keep saying Dan, it is Dan and Matt, to see, you know, if they're interested. But I know, you know, like with the current administration at Lucasfilm, that doesn't seem likely.
Yeah.
But administrations change. So there's always a hope that, the EU can be greenlit again, and that things can move forward again. But in the event that they're not, here we are. We're each doing our part, and every fan does by being a part of the community. However you do it, whether that's just, sharing your books with friends, whatever the case is,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
keeping it alive in your own heart.
Those long nights at the diner when you're just, why are we still drinking coffee? Because you said, and we have to settle this.
Like for me, I went down my own kind of rabbit hole of I wanted to write a story about Obi-Wan, and then now I'm helping start a convention, and it's just like, wait, what just happened? Like, how did my life just go from here to here to here to here? And it's just like, okay, I'm going to California in 2 weeks. Cool. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, we can all contribute in some way, shape, and form. And again, even if it's just to keep it alive in your own heart.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about, like, community is important, because not everybody has friends at home or in their family that they can share this stuff with.
Mm-hmm.
And some Facebook and some public online forums can get hostile and can become places that are unwelcoming.
Yep.
So especially if they're unmoderated. Moderation is important. Over moderation is a problem too. But lack of moderation is a big problem, because then you have trolls and bullies coming into that space and ruining it for people who really just want to express their love of this thing.
Yeah.
So we have a Discord server that you guys are welcome to join. And I'm sure there are other spaces. Join some community that you feel safe in. And be a part of that. Be a part of, this fandom that is still alive. And I think in some ways is maybe, this will sound controversial, maybe healthier than it was before the buyout. And I say that because I've been a part of the fan community for a long time. And sometimes we got, myself included, unnecessarily vitriolic, like needlessly argumentative and negative. And I don't see that as much now, because we've lost it. You don't appreciate something until it's gone.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, I think that we are stronger, those of us who are still involved and I don't know, active, and it's more engaging. And I think that's a beautiful thing. At least that's my experience. That's what I'm seeing. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that there aren't still, problem areas out there, because clearly there are. When you're dealing with humans, you're going to have that.
Yep.
But I'm very proud of at least the community that I'm a part of on Discord and elsewhere. And let's keep that fire alive. I think LegendsCon is going to be a big part of that. Whether, if you can't go, great. Someone will be taking videos and such.
Yeah, but they will be published.
Any of us. Yeah. I mean, you're open to communication. I know Kyle is. I am.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're mod over at the channel, so just the Discord server. So just come talk to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I probably don't have to go this far, but so just like, because we're on the topic too, and like everything that you're really pushing for, Joe, is just like, because you do your best and your damnedest to make sure that no matter how heavy it is or what they're even saying to you personally, you're just still like, if you want my hand, like, you can take it. You can. Oh, that hurt. Here's the hand. Okay, you can still take it, and I will still talk to you. Oh, you spit. Oh my God, I will still talk to you. And we talked about it earlier, how we met, and it's like that's like what that saved my fandom, because I was like in a dark spot, and you mentioned community, and it's just like, hell yeah, we don't have to get together to hate, but we can definitely come together to heal and like do more things. And it's like, for the sake of community, I mean, you actually technically we talked about it earlier, but it's just like directly too, like my being inspired by your positivity that you put into the community inevitably led to LegendsCon. And that's the truth. I mean, I think we talked this long about in this open about so many things that it's like I'll say that too because you actually gave me a number for a person, and we got involved with these folk, and I brought in other members of our editing team, and then Lisa, yep, and we met other people there, and then there was a talking about this subject. It's just like there was a situation in which like okay, so we grew in a different direction, but what I got from it, and the reason why like me and my business partner like put our names on this big risk, this huge risk as far as like a con, like an LLC that's going to actually do this, and up against a very, very, very lovely but damaged group of people, which is like us as fans, like because we've gone through it. I was inspired because of your goodwill, and it's just like what, we're gonna put our financial futures on the line here. We're gonna sign the paperwork, and we're gonna try to get these people together and just take a chance on the fandom and believe that everyone will come together for all the right reasons and like preserve what we love, even if not everybody understands it. Like people do, people get it, and like you all know who you are if you're listening. And I hope that today, like us getting together to talk about something so awesome as far as supernatural encounters, like being available to you now, but there's like a spirit to it that may not come across through text, and I wanted to spend a couple seconds just saying I appreciate you for this and for doing your damnedest to save the community, or at least just understand it. Like even if you're not trying to save it, it's like look, there's a raft if you want one. It's here, and that's all that anybody could ever ask for, and hopefully Amen. People pick up on that.
Amen. There is. I cannot tell you how many have emailed or messaged me and said, I got turned off by, what happened, in this community or that community, or, by the ugliness that emerged in the wake of the Disney buyout, whether it's by anti-EU fans or even by EU fans who are maybe very purist in their stance and whatever the case might be. I mean, don't stop seeking out a community just because one isn't the right one for you. Find another one. There are others out there. Like we've maintained a pretty good one overall. Again, nothing's perfect, but so don't look for perfection. But by the same token, don't quit on the fans just because you had a bad experience. That's basically my message there, because there are good ones out there. We're all part of one right now. Maybe we're part of a few others too. I don't know. But it's important. It's important to have, because this is a thing that's meant to be shared. This joy and this passion and this love that we have. You don't need the official powers that be to sanction something for it to be real, for it to be good. It doesn't matter. I mean, Disney is great. They're off doing their own thing. That's cool. And maybe you enjoy that too. That's also cool. Whatever the case is, we're all here. We're all here. We're keeping this alive. So if you've like you did, if you've lost your faith in this thing, and you're watching this for the first time, come on back. Come back. The doors are wide open, and there's such great people in this community. You guys and many, many more.
Agreed.
That's my pitch.
One thing I saw a few years ago at Celebration when they brought Ahmed Best in, and obviously he went through hell and back through his treatment, and which is so upsetting that he contemplated suicide and stood on the bridge, and then watching the community just shout his name and cheer, and he's just on stage, and like it still gives me chills just like seeing his face of just like utter shock and just like being so touched that like people would still be there for him, and when he felt so lost for a while. And yeah, so Star Wars fans are great. Yeah,
Star Wars fans are great, and every fandom has rotten apples.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yep.
Everything in society does.
Yep.
You know.
Usually men.
You know, it's.
I had to do one man joke in this episode.
You gotta, yeah. Yeah, don't let the bad spoil the good. That's it, because there is still good out there, you know. But you may have to seek it out. That's the thing. You may have to get over the, you know, the hurt and whatever it was to move on to the next thing. So, you know, and if you can, if you do, we're all here. We're here, you know, in open arms, you know. It's a great thing. You know, and there's more coming. Like the EU isn't dead. Supernatural Encounters isn't the end. You know, we've got the Hungarian Han Solo books have been translated.
Ooh.
Finally.
Yes.
That was something that I had been trying to do for 15 years, was to find a translator, and I did. And he is amazing, and his work is amazing, and we have these books in English. Kyle and I are proofreading them. I haven't started yet. Kyle has. We'll get some others on board, and then those will be out.
Get me on board this time.
Yeah, consider it. Yeah, consider it done. Because we need you. And they're great stories from what I've heard, and they're part of this. There's 4 more Han Solo books. I mean, and they're part of continuity. They and we're gonna get to read them finally after all this time.
It's just wild that there's only Hungarian issued books. Like, how did that come about? Like,
it was a thing.
Yeah,
it was a thing. There's a long story behind that, which will be in the book itself, I believe.
In the foreword, there's a pretty nice explanation of the history behind all that.
Okay, cool. It's amazing. It's amazing. Those were written as legit EU books, and regardless of whether the publisher had the actual rights or not, I mean, from the point of view of the author and all of that, they were written to, you know, canonically.
And that community, you know, that's what they loved, and they did not know anything of the wiser. Apparently, once the dawn of the internet came, they were like, "Why isn't our stuff on?" Like, they didn't realize it was their stuff. You know, it's just like, why aren't the books there?
It was a Hungarian author as well.
Yeah. There's a lot there. But everyone was under the impression that they were all systems go. Yeah. And 4 came out, and then they had pulled the plug and tried to pretty much say, like, the final 2, I believe, if memory serves, were just kind of on his own right, but that's not how that happened.
Yeah, and Lucasfilm, it wasn't like Lucasfilm sued them or anything like that.
No, they just pulled the plug
thing go. I mean, it's so it's like a quasi official, but for the Hungarians it was official, and as far as for EU fans, it should be as well.
Yeah.
Is there more Han Solo books?
From your knowledge, is there other countries that have secret books like this, or is it just this one situation?
Well, so
scenario?
Like the Chinese have they call manhuas, I think is the pronunciation, but I'm probably completely off. But those tend to run in their own direction. Like a lot of the authors of these Chinese comics didn't even see the films. They maybe had some stills, and they just
that's kind of
okay.
That's how I understand it too. It's like I believe, if memory serves, so some of them were written off of trailers and whatnot. Just like, okay, so I have a picture of what this is supposed to be, and like that's kind of.
They're very funny.
Yeah,
they're very, very funny. However, the German Ewok comics and magazines. Those again, you know, I was hoping they were going to be reprinted by Marvel because I sent them to Marvel, but they of course can't find the contracts. Same thing that happened with the Spanish Ewoks and Droids comics. So now we have these German ones, and I'll release them. They've been translated. They've been incorporated in the body of the images. So it's just a matter of getting them out to you guys, which I'll do before year's end. Because they are more legitimate Ewok stories that fit in with the cartoons and the comics. And were written to be official, like part of this story. And they're fun. If you're a fan of, the Ewoks in any way, shape, or form, they're a blast.
I learned to love them because of Bessie. I learned to love that verse.
They play a large role in supernatural encounters, like the Ewoks cartoon and comics. Now
I went from obviously, right, I get into pretty much like everything, but that was the one section that I read Shadow of Endor, and I was like, I like that a lot, and that's where I kind of left it, and I feel ashamed now. It's almost as if I can't even picture a lot of things without all that in mind at this point. So
they were written for kids. They were designed.
Yeah, but Essie, I think, gives a legit, and the second trailer was about that too. And it's just like I think that there is a certain level of legitimacy that's offered to them too. You saved a couple different projects that were thought to be found with no pulse there, Jeff. Just maybe that's just an opinion, but I think that a lot of things that were kind of just like whatever with fans, all of a sudden like newfound appreciation for said things.
That's just it. If I can get fans to go back and watch the Ewoks, cartoons and the Droids cartoons and read the comics, and pick up some of these, PG things and these obscure stories, even some of the crossover ones. If I can get fans to do that, then I've done what I set out to do, which is, get us back, get the community and the stories all synergetically working again, where you don't have to look at the Ewoks cartoons as some kind of outlier that doesn't fit, because now you see how it fits. Same with all of this stuff. That was the main goal behind a lot of this, and it started with the Marvel series, and I just kind of expanded out from there.
Yeah,
which is this is how it all works and has relevancy in this great galactic story that we have. To a lesser degree or to a larger degree, whatever the case is, this is how it fits. I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts, once you've had a chance to read it.
You might break the internet, Jeff. You might.
I don't know, because it's a lot to get through. And some of it is dense, and some of it, so if a part is particularly dense, just sort of skip ahead to the next thing is my advice. Because there's a lot.
Yeah, I would if you're planning on, because there's a couple of folk in our Discord server who are like, I'm reading it the first day, and it's like, okay, suggest like 2 packs of Red Bull, coffee. You're gonna need a whole lot of different kinds of lighting.
Stay open.
Yeah, you'll need some dim lights because you're just gonna be so exhausted. You're gonna need some bright lights to get you perking back up again.
Yeah, Matt Wilkins said, he goes, this is not like summer reading, like you don't bring this to the beach, and
Yeah.
I love those kinds of books, but this isn't. This couldn't be that. Even if I had wanted it to, it needed to be what it is.
Yep. And to get that full appreciation, you probably will have to go through it multiple times and really just like, yeah. Yeah. Hey.
Did.
Yeah, a good couple. I think each pass took like 3 or 4 months. That last one though, that was only under 2 months. That was psychotic. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
I am ever impressed with what you did. I couldn't have done it without you. Like I just couldn't. You and Corey and Ed and Harry, and that's the list of names. I'm always leaving out people when I go through this list. Patrick, I couldn't have done it without you guys. That's the truth. So.
Mhm.
And
And
all
now
the
we're
contributors.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, all of you guys who said, yeah, I believe in this thing. Here's money, or if I can't contribute money, here's my moral support. Which of which really does count, because it's a hard thing to do. It's writing is not easy, particularly when you're not getting paid for it. It's hard to do, and to stick with it.
Yeah.
And if you're anything of a perfectionist,
Yep.
then
I think that's all of us right here. Yeah. Like, obsessive. Yeah.
Upset. Yeah. That's the nature of the beast. You want it, you have a certain idea of how it should sound, and you want to get it to that. And that's a process. There are some who, Kevin J. Anderson would kind of just read it into a microphone on his walks, and then he would do a draft after that, and it's pretty much. And I admire anyone who could do that. That's not me. It takes me many drafts to get it to where I want it to go. Everyone's different.
Yeah, each pass was like a completely. Yeah, you could tell.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, we're almost there. We're almost at that point where everyone will start giving their feedback, and whether you love it or hate it or both, that's great, man. It's all welcome. It really is, because we all have different tastes. I mean, that's the bottom line. Not everything is going to register with everybody.
Yeah.
And nor should it.
Yeah.
It's the bottom line. I love the Crystal Star, and I am proud to admit it. Love it. And there are things that I don't like that people adore, and it's great. It's all good. Like, why can't we? If you're not into the EU, if you hate, if you've read a few books or comics and you didn't like them, they didn't resonate with you, whatever, and you were like, great, fine. Why denigrate something that other people love, though? Like, why spend time? I've never understood that.
That's the thing about fear and control. That's a whole different rabbit hole to go down into, though. Like, yeah.
And maybe one day we should, because it's an interesting topic. You just because you don't like it or you don't understand it, or why do you have to go out of your way to put it down for others who do? That just seems mean-spirited to me.
Yeah.
I've been disappointed by things, and I've expressed that disappointment. Definitely, there's no doubt about it. Like, or I think something should have been better. Allegiance by Timothy Zahn. To me did not work, and I can go into the reasons why. But if you loved it, fantastic. Let's talk about what you loved about it, and let's talk about what I didn't love about it. It's all good, but I'm not gonna go online and be like, Timothy Zahn sucks and this book sucks and it never should come out, and you're an idiot if you think it's.
Yeah, we don't have to go out there and trash the ruins of Dantooine. We know.
Yeah.
Get it? I hope that somebody likes it.
I think the ones we criticize the most is Troy Denning on this show. So
we love you, Troy. It's okay, buddy.
Yeah, it's
okay. Star by Star was a classic. Don't get too upset. It's okay.
It's just a fun.
The editor had a lot of typos, though.
We can talk about Troy at another time. Talk about a few people. I've met a lot of authors over the years, and it's been fun.
Yeah.
Aaron Travis, we could talk about.
Oh.
Yeah.
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 I love her books, but she was not terribly nice to me.
Oh,
But I still love her books.
I
Yeah.
I could see that. Yeah, I love her
Yeah.
books. We're all big fans here. But yeah, I could
Yep.
from just what I've seen of her personality online, you just go,
Yeah.
oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right. I'm just
No,
gonna go
there's-
this. I'm just gonna go this way now. Like,
Yeah.
but like
It's
her
the
books are
work.
amazing. Like
Yes, that's just it.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
if we were to reduce, if we were to go and cancel the works of every artist that said or did something that we don't agree with or we don't like, we would eliminate the entire body of art and entertainment.
Yeah.
The entire body, because
There it goes.
we're all imperfect and we all have said or done things that we shouldn't have said or done, or have beliefs that seem weird to other people. I mean, we were all immature at one time. And that's another thing too, is to allow, people to grow. Society has grown. You can't judge, writers or artists from the 1920s for the views that they had. When those were common views, and they may be repugnant views.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to throw them out because of you have to separate the art from the artist. And it's really the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even the Magic Flute by Mozart had riots, so like things change, things happen,
Yeah.
and that's opera.
Nazi. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of there's so many examples of that. But yeah, we're in this weird time period where we are kind of hold up artists on a pedestal, and it's unhealthy.
Yeah,
It's unhealthy.
yeah,
Touch the work,
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't even want to know. I just want to enjoy the stories, the music, the films, whatever the art is, the paintings. That is really, unless the person was egregiously evil.
Yeah.
That's a different story. And it's still
Yeah, Hitler.
supporting him or herself, right?
Yeah.
Buy those works. Yeah, I may not purchase them if that's the case.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know.
they have to be displayed in maybe a different way. Recognizing this is kind of a little bit dark. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go wasting time on that either.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been awesome, man.
This is fun.
This
Yeah.
has been awesome, dude. And I hope that you have a sense of not closure, because we talked about that before too, because like artists typically don't just stop moving just because this one's gone. But I hope that you're proud of what you've done here, and I'm really, yeah, the world's a lucky place right now to be able to experience it, because it's we're gonna come into the next era here, and 2023 is gonna rock the Star Wars community. You have a very large hand in that. So
Thank you. I hope
congratulations, sir.
I hope so, man. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Lisa, thank you for having me on.
Oh,
This was
So
blast.
happy. Yeah. Very happy that you could join us, and we finally got some answers, and although you guys were still a little
A little
secretive.
cagey. Sorry about that.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
just tell
The
me.
next time. The next
Well-
time, like once you've read it, we'll be able to go into
Yeah.
some of that.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't want to give my take on things. I think fans should have their own interpretations of things and discover things on their own and grow with it. Because I think that's important. I don't know to the degree that like David Lynch goes with that. Is that, he's extremely cagey to the point of frustration. It's like, tell me more. But on the other hand, the author definitively said this, and therefore, it's like, no, like, kind of discover it on your own and have fun with it and think about it. And that's more important than, so and so said that, unless someone goes like way off and it's like, this work supports authoritarianism. No, you walked away with a very different take. It's like unless
Maybe
it's
that
something
one
egregious.
you'll be willing to give your take on.
And, right,
on that
exactly.
That's funny. Yeah.
Aw.
Well, I'm very, very, very happy you came on today, and I look forward to meeting you at LegendsCon, which is for
Yes.
everyone, guys. That's September 9th and 10th in Burbank, California. So that's coming up very soon, and I'm almost like I'm at the point where I'm like, can I start packing? Like, I just want to like put my stuff in a bag. Like,
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
It's only 2 weeks away.
so much to do. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Yes, there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, for everyone listening, I'm sure we've said it a couple times, but Joe will be there, and
And we'll be
yeah,
there.
if there's any,
We'll be moderating
yeah, we'll be there
panels.
too. Yeah, but we'll have some tables maybe. I don't know,
Yeah.
sharing the work, say hello to people. But yeah, we don't. The community doesn't get a chance to talk to you out there too much, So it's definitely an opportunity to come out and meet you and also celebrate your achievement with you. So
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Come to. I'll have 2 panels at least, which is the Supernatural Encounters panel, which Lisa you will be moderating on.
Yep.
And Kyle, you'll be there with me.
yep, it's gonna be fun.
I hope.
Yep.
And I'll be doing a history of space opera presentation,
Which is awesome.
Yes.
I'm working on now.
Yes. I expect it to be a very highly viewed video on YouTube. Because again, we can't live stream. That's okay, but all the panels be recorded. And gosh, Joe, I hope you're ready for that can of worms, sir, because I'm sure that you're gonna get there too.
We'll see.
It's gonna be freaking awesome. It's gonna be awesome.
Absolutely. Positive thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna do great.
Exactly. All right. Well,
thank you, guys.
Thank you for being here, and thanks, Kyle, for doing all your work with the book as well,
Hey.
and involving me and getting me into everything. So
it was probably one of the most spiritual experiences that I've gone through. So it's yeah, it was great.
And now I just feel bad for my computer, which is going to have to render this file, and it's going to take like
That's okay.
It'll take a while. So hopefully, guys, this episode drops on Sunday, the same time you drop the book. So it's as soon as I hit stop record, I'm going to be editing. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
and just so you don't have to, check out Joe's site, StarWarsTimeline.net.
Yeah.
I figured I would take care of the plug for you there, sir. But yeah, check out his site, StarWarsTimeline.net.
Exactly. And then, join the Discord, join our Discord. I'll put it in the show notes as well. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. So I'm Lisa.
And I'm Kyle.
I'm Joe.
And may the force be with you. Bye. That concludes this edition of Legends Library Podcast. To join the discussion, email us at legendslibrarypodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter or Discord at Legends Library. This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for informational or entertainment purposes only. Official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights to Disney and respective copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Legends Library Podcast, otherwise indicated. Legends Library. There's always a bit of truth in legends.